Radio City in New York, it is the pleasure of the National Broadcasting Company to bring you Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade, featuring his world-famed swing and sway music.
This is yours truly, Sammy Kaye, welcoming you most heartily to our Sunday Serenade. These lovely words we hear from Tommy Ryan. This is no laughing matter. Somehow I want to cry. I know you're sweet and I don't chatter really means goodbye. This is no laughing matter. I thought we'd never part. This is no time for pretty matters while you break my heart. What of all the moon dreams shared together beside the garden wall? Love can't always have that perfect weather. A little rain must fall. Think of the dreams you'll shatter if you should stay true. This is no laughing matter, darling. I'm in love with you.
The shrine of Saint Cecilia. The bells in the chapel never ring anymore. The clock in the steeple can't tell time as before. But upon the hillside stands a place heavenly, the shrine of Saint Cecilia. Each day at eventide, when I seek haven from my daily care, you find me by her side. It seems so peaceful there. I kneel in my solitude and silently pray. at the shrine of Saint Cecilia.
And soothing, the music of Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade.
Sincero
charm of Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade.
This love of mine goes on and on. Though life is empty since you have gone, you're always on my mind. Though out of sight, it's lonesome through the day, and the night I cry my heart out, it's bound to break. Since nothing matters, let it break. I ask the sun and the moon, the stars that shine, what to become of this love of mine. I miss you all the long hours through. I'm restless, don't know what to do. Time simply drags when you're not near. Each hour to me seems like a year. I cannot be contented here when we're apart. I turn to music then, and so I listen to the radio. But even music cannot fill my hours with joy. They're lonesome still. For music loses every thrill when we're apart. It's difficult explaining this. I live, yet something seems amiss. The sun still rises, red and bright. The sunset casts its glorious light. But something's lacking in the sight when we're apart. I'm not ashamed I feel so blue that I miss you the way I do. For greater men than I could be in just the self-same misery as I am, and will ever be when we're apart.
Lovely Girl, Lovely Words by Alan Foster.
Madeleine, flower of Normandy. Madeleine, my weeping fleur-de-lis. Stars have lost their light since we're apart. Through the silent night, my heart is calling. Madeleine, someday we'll meet once more. Once again, we'll dream just like before. Pray with me that we shall see that lovely land we need. Then, Madeleine, I'll come back to you.
From our old and tattered, but ever beloved dusty manuscript, from showboats come these songs. First, My Bill. until tomorrow. Good night, my love, until tomorrow. Sleep tight, my love. May starlight bring love dreams to you from up above. Until tomorrow, good night, my sweet. And then tomorrow, once more we'll meet. So kiss me and miss me until tomorrow. Good night, my
This is yours truly, Sammy Kaye, thanking you so much for being with us again. Until next Sunday at the same time, may we wish you the best of luck, every happiness, and a most pleasant week to come.
It has been the pleasure of the National Broadcasting Company to bring you Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade, featuring his world-famed swing and sway music. The poem read by Sammy Kaye was When We're Apart by Wilson Darren. Today's broadcast has come to you from our studios in Radio City, New York. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Which for 2 years has been at war with Adolf Hitler. To the battlefront of the world, this neighbor at war has sent men, food, airplanes, guns, and ships.
The World Today. By shortwave radio, Columbia now brings you reports from its foreign correspondents overseas with summaries of the latest world news presented over these stations by Golden Eagle Gasoline. Go ahead, New York.
The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Which for 2 years has been at war with Adolf Hitler. To the battlefronts of the world, this neighbor at war has sent men, food, airplanes, guns, and ships. 13 months ago, President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Mackenzie King agreed to merge the Canadian and American defense efforts through a joint defense production committee. And 8 months ago, additional committees began to plan defense, to control materials, and to integrate the war and defense efforts of the two nations. What has been Canada's effort in the war thus far? How is inflation controlled? What about labor? What lessons can the United States learn from Canada? To bring to you and other intelligent, alert citizens the answers to these and related questions, the Roundtable opens its New York microphones to 3 observers who will discuss Canada, a neighbor at war, a discussion that represents the individual views of the participants and in no way represents the views of any agency or government. Participating are George Britnell, economic advisor to the Wartime Prizes and Trade Board, the Dominion of Canada, and professor of economics at the University of Saskatchewan, John McCormack, author and Canadian correspondent of the New York Times, and Neil H. Jacoby, professor of finance at the University of Chicago, at present on leave to the National Bureau of Economic Research. Mr. Jacoby.
When Canada is mentioned, I suspect that Americans most frequently think of two things, the Dion quintuplets and the scarlet-coated Royal Canadian Mounted Police, whose pictures we Americans so often admire. But I wonder whether these very colorful elements of Canadian life are the important things today, McCormick.
No, Jacoby, I don't think they really are the most important things. I think Americans should realize that Canada is both a problem and an opportunity for the United States, as well as a great playground, of course. The problem is that the United States must protect Canada for our own security. But the opportunity is in the fact that Canada is a member of what President Roosevelt called the sisterhood of the British Empire, and that through Canada, a very friendly country, the United States can, to a considerable extent, align the policies of that empire with our own. Don't you agree, Britnell?
Well, no doubt, McCormick. Canada can be looked upon by the United States as a laboratory in which certain experiments are taking place in an economy which has definitely streamlined itself for war.
You know, one thing that has interested me a great deal, Britnell, is that Canada got into this war as a result of an independent political decision. The question of war came to a vote of Parliament, and the people of Canada, through their Parliament, voted to get into it.
Yes, Canada is certainly at war by our own free choice. The Prime Minister of Canada called a special session of Parliament 4 days after the British and French declarations of war on Germany at the beginning of September 1939. After a full-fledged debate, the Canadian Parliament did vote itself, almost unanimously, in favor of participation. Therefore, on September the 10th, the King, at the specific request of the Canadian government, declared that a state of war existed between Canada and Germany. As one Canadian summed it up the other day, King George VI of England did not ask us to declare war for him. We asked King George VI of Canada to declare war for us.
That's quite a different picture than most Americans have in mind regarding the entry of Canada into the war. And I can't help but feel that it compares favorably with our own congressional activity in that regard. Very few of the questions involving our steps into the war or in the defense effort have been presented to Congress for vote before they occur.
You think it's better, Jacoby, to declare war rather than merely to fight it?
I think it's better to have the elected representatives of the people make a decision beforehand. I like that Canadian procedure.
There's a great deal of criticism, I may say, in Canada after even the weeks delay that ensued.
Well, that may be. But in any event, Canada has got a real interest in this war, arising from the fact that about 40% of Canadian production is exported. Would you say, Britnell, as a Canadian, that Canada's economic interest in the war exceeds that, or is equal to that of any other parts of the British Empire?
I don't know that it would be greater than the economic interest of Australia or New Zealand, but it certainly is great. And we depend, I'm speaking of Canada, Canada depends a great deal on the export market to sell her raw materials particularly.
Well, perhaps we can account for Canada's decision to get into it then to a real economic interest. The fact that she depends as much as any other country upon the maintenance of world free trade, for which the British Empire has always been a great bulwark.
I think that's true, Jacoby. I think we should now discuss what Canada's war effort has been. We hear a lot about it here. We hear a lot for it and a lot against it. I think we should decide just what it has been. We have Mr. Britnell here, an authority very lately come to tell us.
What percent of your national income, Britnell, in Canada is being currently devoted to war?
About 40% at the present time.
Well, that compares with 18% in the United States. How about next year?
Well, at the present rate, it seems unlikely that 40% will suffice for next year. It's much more likely to be close to 50%, I should think, although I have seen no definite figures.
That compares with about 25% of our national income devoted to war next year. So that it would seem that your effort in Canada is now about twice as intense and will be next year, as is our own.
Well, of course, Canada started earlier.
Yes, Canada has about a 9-month lead on this problem of the war and defense over us. In terms of enlisted men, Canada has sent overseas an expeditionary force, and they also have many men under arms at home. What are the facts there, Britnell?
Well, the number of men Canada has enlisted for service anywhere in the world in the Army, Navy, and Air Force exceeds 360,000. If you take Canada's population
as being 11.5 million, say, and the United States as being about 130 million, this would be equivalent to an overseas military force of rather more than 4 million in American terms.
That well compares with the maximum effort we made in the First World War.
Can we say an overseas military force?
That's the total.
Active service force. That is the total, isn't it? I mean, the overseas force would be somewhat smaller.
Yes. Canadians already overseas exceed 150,000, equivalent, say, to an American expeditionary force of a little over 1.5 million.
Well, Bricknell, that has been achieved, too, without conscription for overseas service. Every Canadian that goes across the oceans is doing so voluntarily. Why hasn't conscription for overseas service been imposed in Canada?
That, of course, is a question that has some political significance, and many reasons would be advanced for it. Speaking as a rather cold-blooded economist, I'm inclined to think that so far there hasn't been much necessity for conscription. We have only a limited pool of manpower available for military service, for industry, and for agriculture.
What's wrong with the woman power of Canada? But no.
Well, we're mobilizing that very rapidly. We have a women's army now. We also are taking large numbers of women into the factories and have been for a considerable period.
Your point is that conscription for overseas service, or the sending even on a voluntary...
We interrupt this program to take you to the NBC newsroom. Right. From the NBC newsroom in New York. The White House also reported today an simultaneous air attack on Army and Navy bases in Manila. This report followed the President's declaration that all Army and Navy bases on the island of Oahu in Hawaii are now under air attack. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York. Now back to our regularly scheduled programs.
Canada can hardly stand out. We'll then have to have conscription running for the sake of uniformity.
Yes, it'll be hard to conscript Americans overseas if Canadians are not also being conscripted. But what about this Canadian Lend-Lease program? I understand that Canada, apart from her own expeditionary force for which she is paying, is lending and leasing tremendous quantities of food and equipment to Great Britain.
Yes, she has, in the present year, sent some $22.5 billion in United States terms. Britain pays for only a fraction of these exports. In short, Canada lends supplies to Britain of about $900 million for the current year.
That would be about the equivalent of, as you say, of somewhere between 15 and 16, and as against that, she is getting largely unusable sterling credits in London. Am I right, Whitney?
Yes.
Well, as we discuss this subject of Canada, neighbor at war, on the University of Chicago Roundtable, it seems that we ought to make another point, and that is that Canada is not borrowing from the United States. She's paying for this machinery and equipment she's getting from this country in cash.
She pays cash for that.
So that Canada is not a participant in the American lease-lend program, although she has one of her own, by which she is aiding Britain.
Some materials come into Canada from the United States for use in materials to be shipped later to Britain.
Bricknell, does Canada's effort compare with that of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the other British dominions favorably?
Comparisons of this nature are always very difficult and subject to criticism. But I was rather surprised to see some months ago, I must say I haven't seen any recent figures, that in terms of national income, a study of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London showed that the proportion of Canada's national income being devoted to war was rather larger than any of the other British dominions.
Then we agree also, Bricknell and Jacoby, too, that comparisons of this nature are not only difficult, but odious in circumstances.
Precisely.
What makes them odious, McCormick?
I think that it must be admitted that the British dominions, if Canada is still a dominion, their position is now slightly different, are, if not now, in a short time, will be doing their very utmost. Their resources are already strained almost to the limit, and I think soon will reach that limit.
Yes, but the point is that Canada has gone farther along that path. of converting her resources to the imperial war effort than has the other dominions. That, to me, is a very striking.
To be fair to Australia, the positions are very different.
The Canadian natural resources and Canadian industrial plant is perhaps considerably more easily geared for war, as Mr. McCormick, I think, implied.
Well, I'm implying also that Canada's fortunate in having next door a great pool of skill, a great pool of resources, of organization. In other words, the United States.
Exactly. Very true. Canada has not been able to create this tremendous war effort without surrendering some of the liberties that traditionally have belonged to Canadians. I understand, Britnell, that you have suspended trial by jury and what the lawyers call habeas corpus, and that you now permit your policemen to go around and pick up people who were engaged in activities considered bad for the defense effort and put them in jail without trial. Is that a fact?
I suppose it is a fact, but I don't think there are a great number of people in Canada who are concerned with that. In the case of the mayor of Montreal, for instance, the mayor of Montreal, who is the most notorious case so far, undoubtedly broke the law by urging his fellow Canadians not to register after the law had been passed.
And I think we must admit that the mayor of Montreal in any case is a very special case. If one had to be in an internment camp, I think one would like to be in with Camilla, but at the same time one would quite understand why Camilla himself was there.
Well, but you have also, apart from Mr. Poove, the mayor of Montreal, put into detention camps, as you rather nicely call these concentration camps of yours, certain communist labor leaders, I believe.
Shall we say that the government has said that they are communist labor leaders?
Yes, the jury hasn't even decided that they are communists.
How about it, Bretton?
I know a good many labor leaders in Canada. I know a good many labor leaders of your CIO in Canada. I don't know any of those who are in jail.
Well, at least, Britnell, we know that they let you out of Canada to come down to broadcast on the University of Chicago Roundtable, and I can testify from looking at you that you haven't got the pallor of a concentration camp on your cheek. But there is this question, whether civil liberties that have been removed will be restored after the war is over.
Well, we have the experience of the last war to go by. There was very considerable abridgment of certain political and civil liberties in the last war. They were restored easily, one might almost say automatically for the most part, very shortly after the war ended.
Yes, I understand that Canada went so far as to take away the right to vote from a rather substantial fraction of the population that had been naturalized after, I think it was 1908, because it felt that if those people voted, they might vote against the policies then being pursued. Yet that right was restored shortly after the war, was it not?
Yes, that's the situation.
When I was in Western Canada about a month ago, I talked to a great many people, air pilots in training, procurement officers, businessmen, and I was surprised to find the extent to which they were agreed in favor of the Canadian war effort. Western Canadians have been Canadian nationalists in the past, and many of them none too much in favor of the imperial tie with the empire. But I find that they're very much in favor of extending all aid in the effort.
One should let Britnell answer this because he's a Westerner. It is a fact, undoubtedly, however, that the Canadian farmer, particularly the prairie farmer, has realized that his only market is the British market. He still has that. If he hadn't it, he would be completely on the go. And that undoubtedly has changed his opinion. On the other hand, there's been a somewhat corollary change of opinion in the East, slightly in the other direction. Eastern Canada is far more friendly to the United States than she was before.
Yeah.
Even Toronto, the great home of what is called imperialist sentiment, is now very well disposed towards the United States, as I found even a year ago when I was advocating in some speeches there for American-Canadian relations.
Which shows that even the best of us are susceptible to economic influences.
Right. True. But you have, Britnell, a very important problem of unity in Canada, the French-Canadian problem. 1/3 of your population is of French descent. What issues is that raising now for the government of Canada?
Well, the record of French Canada, I think, probably speaks for itself. The first voice raised in the Dominion in favor of the draft as we have it was by a French Canadian in Parliament. And the first editorial comment came from two French language newspapers.
And might I interrupt you, Britnell, and take it a little farther back? The first speech in the Canadian Parliament, I heard it myself, which pointed out that when Britain was at war, Canada could not remain neutral, was made by the late Ernest Lapointe, who died just a week ago, the French Canadian, the leader of Quebec.
I heard that speech myself.
While we're discussing Canada, neighbor at war, a good many of us we Americans' attentions will be focused on the problem of price control. You just put into effect last Monday a new price control law, which goes much farther than anything that we have adopted in this country, despite the fact that Congress here has been wrestling with price control for some time.
Yes, we put on, in Canada, a general ceiling on prices. The Canadians decided that a price ceiling was the quickest measure to apply. They also decided that to fix all prices at once seemed more just, since, after all, one man's prices are another man's cost. Or as Kai Lung said a long time ago, one man's floor is another man's ceiling.
You know, your Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, made a very intelligent statement of the problem of price control. Perhaps I might add facetiously, because he's a graduate of our own University of Chicago. He said this: it is obvious that the prices of finished goods cannot be controlled successfully unless the cost of production is also controlled. Wages are a large element in the cost of producing the manufactured goods required by consumers. That is why the cost of living cannot be controlled unless wages are also stabilized. Now, the trick that you were able to work in Canada was to get the farmers and the labor unions to agree to wage and agricultural price control. How did you do it?
Well, labor has agreed to the cost of living bonus as a method. There are certain difficulties in agriculture, but the outstanding difficulty comes, of course, with wheat, because with respect to most other agricultural products, prices have pulled up very satisfactorily since the beginning of the war.
How high was the stratosphere prices before you put a ceiling over it?
The increase in prices, in retail prices, in the cost of living, showed an increase of about 14 to 15% since the beginning of the war.
Well, that's hardly a stratosphere at all. I imagine that is no greater, if as great as the increase here. How about it, Jacoby?
Well, the trouble is, McCormick, that price rises, as I think Britnell will agree, are like snowballs. The increase is small at first, but as the price goes higher, the rise becomes faster.
The point I wanted to bring out is that Canada has been at war for 2 years and has still had only a 14% increase in the cost of living. That's not bad, I think.
Yes, but what concerned Canada was not so much the increase in the cost of living as the rate of increase in the cost of living over the last 6 or 7 months, which was equal to the rate in the preceding 20 months. And it was obvious that having reached a position of relatively full employment for both manpower and natural resources and plants, that we could only hope to divert larger quantities of our production to the war effort by adopting a rather drastic policy to curb inflation.
You count down on the retailer, don't you?
The first principle of the policy is, of course, that the retail price ceiling must be maintained. But I don't think it's completely accurate to say that we've clamped down on the retailer. Because if the retailer is badly caught, then manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors will have to help in making adjustments so that the squeeze will be distributed as equitably as possible.
Britnell, while you were talking, I've just learned that the Japanese are now bombing Burma. This is an act that may lead the United States to war against Japan. It may lead Canada to more active military effort against Japan. I merely mention this to show how fast events are moving while we're discussing these adjustments that are being made in the Canadian and American economies during the war. But to pursue this question of price control further, you have in Canada a compulsory cooling-off period in case strikes are threatened in defense plants. How has that worked? Have you found that the amount of time lost through strikes has been materially cut down?
I have no statistics with me on that point. But I don't think there is any great concern in Canada over the problem of maintaining our industries at work most, if not all of the time.
There has certainly been nothing, I think, Britnell, that you could compare to the recent epidemic of strikes here. There's nothing so sensational, so widespread, or so acute.
Perhaps that's because you have seen some more skillful statesmanship on the part of both labor leaders and business management than we have had. But some other things you've done in Canada, it seems to me, have lessons for we Americans. You have inaugurated a campaign to sell war savings certificates to the public. I think you went to all the bankers, didn't you, and asked them to tell local committees of citizens how much war savings certificates each citizen could buy out of his bank deposits.
I hadn't heard that, but I do know that there are hundreds of thousands of Canadians with very modest incomes today who are putting aside a surprisingly large part of their income each week or each month to buy war savings certificates.
What about taxes? Take a $1,600 income supporting a man and wife. What tax would that family have to pay in Canada now?
Well, in Canada now, he would pay $71.
And he pays only $2 or $3 or $4 in the United States.
$6, I believe.
$6. About the $3,000 income. What is your tax
about
in Canada?
$3,000. The income tax for the United States, I believe, is $138.
That's
in
right.
Canada, it would be $355. Canada has had to go where the money is. That is, to the lower and middle income tax brackets. And all through the income tax brackets of the middle class, you will find that we in Canada are taking roughly 2.5 times as much as you in the United States.
And I imagine that is what accounts for the fact that you're planning this year to pay for about 3/4 of all your war expenditure out of taxes instead of loans. Our plans in the United States initially were to pay for 2/3 of the defense program out of taxes, but if Senator George's recent statement that we have enough taxes and there will be no new taxes goes into effect, it means that we will not currently pay for the war to the same extent.
Don't forget there's an election coming next November.
Perhaps that accounts for the statement at this time. But
I don't think, as one who has something to do with the Treasury from time to time, I don't think that Secretary Morgenthau, who's a very persistent man, has given up all idea of taxation on a scale something like that in Canada.
McCormick, there's a broader question in this subject of Canada, neighbor at war. And that is the question of what the war is doing to Canadian-American relations. In your book, Canada, America's Problem, you had a good deal to say about that. You said, I think, that Canada should be an interpreter between Britain and the United States.
Yes, I said that, and I mean it. Now, we've all agreed, we've all heard statistics that show that Canada's war effort has been extremely substantial. And yet two of us here know, Mr. Britnell may not, that Canada's war record has been used as an argument, not by the interventionists, but by the isolationists. It was one of the more prominent arguments in the dying days of discussion of the Lease-Len Bill. Now, that Lease-Len Bill, in my opinion, defined the relations in an economic sense between the British Empire and the United States for some time to come. And it is extremely difficult to understand that Canada, whose war record we agree has been good, should be cited as a country which was not doing its best. I think the blame lies partly on the shoulders of the Canadian government, which had an awfully good case, which refused to make it until the Lease-Len Bill had been passed.
Well, Britnell, that's a charge at your government. What have you to say on that?
Might I interrupt for one moment? Before Britnell answers it, I would like to say that, in my opinion, the Canadian government, at least its present Prime Minister is determined that Canada shall speak here only with their own voice and shall not use their influence for the British Empire as a whole.
Of course, in this, as in everything else which I've said this afternoon, I speak only as a private citizen of Canada. And it does seem clear to me that Canada is not a world power in the same sense as the United States and Great Britain are world powers. And I'm not quite sure how far Canada and Canadians are competent to go in this difficult business of interpreting Great Britain to the United States or the United States to Great Britain.
Well, however that may be, Britnell, I think we can agree that Americans have a good deal to learn from Canada's war experience. We can look at it. That's a charge at your government. What have you to say on
it? Might I interrupt for one moment before Britnell answers it? I would like to say that, in my opinion, the Canadian government, at least its present Prime Minister, is determined that Canada shall speak here only with their own voice and shall not use their influence for the British Empire as a whole.
Of course, in this, as in everything else which I've said this afternoon, I speak only as a private citizen of Canada. And it does seem clear to me that Canada is not a world power in the same sense as the United States and Great Britain are world powers. And I'm not quite sure how far Canada and Canadians are competent to go in this difficult business of interpreting Great Britain to the United States or the United States to Great Britain.
Well, however that may be, Britnell, I think we can agree that Americans have a good deal to learn from Canada's war experience. We can learn that the cost of living cannot be controlled without fixing wages and farm prices as well as industrial prices. Americans can learn that a compulsory cooling-off period before strikes is a useful method of preventing slowdowns and shutdowns in defense work. Finally, Americans can learn that an all-out defense effort does not fasten dictatorship permanently on a free people, even though it does entail temporary curtailment of civil liberties. Canada is, as we have all agreed here, making a tremendous contribution to the war effort of the British Empire. Yet, whether that war is won or lost, Canada's economic and political future is inevitably bound more closely to that of the United States.
Agreed.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to University of Chicago Roundtable discussion of Canada, a neighbor at war. Participating in the informal discussion were George Britnell, economic advisor to the Wartime Prices and Trade Board, the Dominion of Canada, and professor of economics at the University of Saskatchewan, John McCormack, author and Canadian correspondent of the New York Times, and Neil H. Jacoby, professor of finance at the University of Chicago, at present on leave to the National Bureau of Economic Research. In this discussion, the participants spoke for themselves and in no way represent the views of any agency or government. Thousands of intelligent Americans who want to keep up to date on the meaning and significance of world events purchase a copy of the Roundtable's printed transcript each week. Single copies are 10 cents. For $1, a transcript will be sent to you for the next 26 weeks. Please address your transcript orders and any comments you may have about today's Roundtable of any agency or government. Thousands of intelligent Americans who want to keep up to date on the meaning and significance of world events purchase a copy of the Roundtable's printed transcript each week. Single copies are 10 cents. For $1, a transcript will be sent to you for the next 26 weeks. Please address your transcript orders and any comments you may have about today's Roundtable of any agency or government. Thousands of intelligent Americans who want to keep up to date on the meaning and significance of world events purchase a copy of the Roundtable's printed transcript each week. Single copies are 10 cents. For $1, a transcript will be sent to you for the next 26 weeks. Please address your transcript orders and any comments you may have about today's Roundtable to the University of Chicago Roundtable, Chicago, Illinois. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday at the same time over this same station for an especially timely and important Roundtable discussion, Civil Rights and Public Danger. The Roundtable came to you today from the NBC studios in Radio City, New York, and is a public service feature of
Not on my account. You can say anything you like. Thank you.
We interrupt this program to take you to NBC Newsroom.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
To get any sense lying in bed if you're not sick. I suppose tastes are different.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. White House is now giving out a statement. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. The president's brief statement was read to reporters by Stephen Early, the president's secretary. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack, and hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the president would ask Congress for a declaration of war. There is no doubt from the temper of Congress that such a declaration would be granted. This morning, Secretary Hull talked with the Secretaries of War and of the Navy. Now the two special Japanese envoys, Admiral Nomura and Special Envoy Kurusu, are at the State Department, engaged in conference with Secretary of State Hull. Their appearance at the State Department on this Sunday afternoon emphasizes the gravity of the Far Eastern situation, where hostilities now seem to be actually opening over the whole South Pacific. Even more important than the visit of Tokyo's diplomats is this news which comes from Pearl Harbor and the news which comes from South Asia. Whatever the diplomats from Tokyo or the cabinet in Tokyo may be saying, there is a conviction in official quarters here that Japan has now cast the die. All the bits of information which came to the State Department and the Navy yesterday and today indicated that Japanese transports containing troops were steaming into the Gulf of Thailand. Japanese warships were providing a heavy escort. Having rounded the southernmost point of French Indochina, the convoy had as its only obvious destination Bangkok, the capital of Thailand. It was on the basis of this information that President Roosevelt sent to Emperor Hirohito of Japan his personal message last night, a message which appealed to the Mikado for restraint and peace. It seemed to be a final plea from the United States. And if the activities today are substantiated, it is a final plea. For if Japanese troops attempt to capture Bangkok or attack Pearl Harbor, the delicate balance which has maintained peace in South Asia is destroyed. The four powers, the United States, Britain, the Dutch East Indies, and Australia, have given Japan ample warning that invasion of Thailand would mean counteraction by the associated powers. These Japanese envoys, Nomura and Kurusu, requested the appointment with Mr. Hull today. The engagement was set for 1:45 p.m. They arrived some minutes late and in turn were kept waiting before the door to Mr. Hull's office was opened to them at 2:20. In the meantime, the President had prepared the statement which announced that Japan was attacking Pearl Harbor from the air. It is possible that the Tokyo diplomats wanted again to assure the State Department that the reports of Japanese troop movements in French Indochina were exaggerated. They did that once before on instructions from Tokyo when the President propounded his question about those movements last Tuesday. At that time, Tokyo replied that the movements were in North Indochina to offset Chinese movements on the Indochina border. Specific information of the State Department now and then was that the bulk of the Japanese troops were being moved to South Indochina, where they were in a better position to threaten Thailand. The President's plea to Emperor Hirohito was also supported by a note of warning. The warning is supported by developments and preparations in this capital. The meeting between Secretary Hull and the Secretaries of War and Navy this morning was an example of the plans that are being laid. It would be a mistake for Japan to believe that these preparations are any kind of bluff. Although officials in Washington are silent on what would be the definite consequences of a Japanese attack on Hawaii or an attack on Thailand, there are indications of what is being considered, and the steps which may be taken this very afternoon. The first would be a severance of diplomatic relations with Tokyo. An immediate naval blockade in which the American Navy would take a leading part, along with British units, is the other probability. Both these steps could be taken by the President on his own executive authority. But an effective naval blockade, of course, could not continue long without hostilities. As a matter of fact, according to the President's announcement, those hostilities are already underway with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And just now comes the word from the President's office that a second air attack has been reported on Army and Navy bases in Manila. Thus, we have official announcements from the White House that Japanese airplanes have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and have now attacked Army and Navy bases in Manila. We return you now to New York and will give you later information as it comes along from the White House. Return you now to New York.
For a direct report on British reaction to the latest moves in the Near East and the Far East, Bob Trout is standing by in the British capital. Go ahead, London.
London heard its first news of the attacks on Hawaii and the Philippines from John Charles Daly in New York just a few moments ago. The report had not arrived in London before this Columbia program began. It is, of course, too early to give you any reaction, but as you know, the British government made plain what would happen if America became involved in war with Japan some days ago. We did get earlier that official report from Singapore that British air reconnaissance in the South China Seas had confirmed the earlier reports of Japanese activities. Japanese naval vessels, including cruisers, seen off the southern tip of Indochina, steaming toward the northwest. That announcement backed up those earlier dispatches from Washington telling of heavy Japanese troop concentrations in Indochina, both ashore and afloat. About the President's message to the Emperor of Japan, we heard nothing except the announcement that a message had been sent.
We have a women's army now. We also are taking large numbers of women into the factories and have been for a considerable period.
Your point is that conscription for overseas service, or the sending even on a voluntary...
We interrupt this program to take you to the NBC newsroom. From the NBC newsroom in New York, the White House also reported today an simultaneous air attack on Army and Navy bases in Manila. This report followed the President's declaration that all Army and Navy bases on the island of Oahu in Hawaii are now under air attack. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
Canada can hardly stand out. You'll then have to have conscription of women for the sake of uniformity.
Let's see, yes.
Bringing up the Gulf of Siam towards Bangkok. Across the China Sea from the Philippines.
Due to line troubles beyond...
Is badly caught. Then manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors will have to help in making adjustments so that the squeeze will be distributed as equitably as possible.
Whitnell, while you were talking, I've just learned that the Japanese are now bombing Burma. This is an act that may lead the United States to war against Japan. It may lead Canada to more active military effort against Japan. I merely mention this to show how fast events are moving while we're discussing these adjustments that are being made in the Canadian and American economies during the war. But to pursue this question of price control further, you have in Canada...
Here is a flash just received in our newsroom. Dateline Washington. United States Army transport carrying lumber was torpedoed 1,300 miles west of San Francisco. Details on this news and other news that has been coming in on the Far East situation will be given to you at approximately 3:35 during the intermission of the New York Philharmonic concert. We return you now to the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. This program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
The Symphony No. 1 in F minor by the modern Russian composer Shostakovich, performed as the opening work on this afternoon's Philharmonic program, Artur Rudziński conducting. Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and Manila, the Philippine Islands, from the air. The attack is developing. Today, Deems Taylor's usual commentary will be replaced by a further report on the Far Eastern situation. We pause now for 15 seconds. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
This is WCCO, studios in Minneapolis and St. Paul. The Twin City temperature 37 degrees.
This is John Daly speaking from the CBS newsroom in New York. Here is the Far East situation as reported to this moment. The Japanese have attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and our defense facilities at Manila, capital of the Philippines. The first disclosure of this news was made by Presidential Secretary Stephen Early by telephone at approximately 2:25 in Washington. I read the text of this historic announcement at a little after 2:30. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor from the air and all naval and military activities on the island of Oahu, the principal American base in the Hawaiian Islands. That was Secretary Early's message. Short while later, he dictated another message. A second air attack has been reported. This one has been made on the Army and Navy bases in Manila. And here's a last-minute Associated Press flash from Honolulu. A naval engagement is in progress off Honolulu with at least one black enemy aircraft carrier in action against the Pearl Harbor defenses. Secretary Early informed all correspondents and then rushed to the White House to be with President Roosevelt. As the announcement was made, the two Japanese envoys, Ambassador Nomura and Special Emissary Kurosu, were at the State Department. Columbia's correspondent in London, Bob Trout, heard the news for the first time from our report from New York. Up to that moment, or very shortly before then, the British capital had not been informed of the Japanese attack on the Hawaiian Islands and on Manila. In view of Prime Minister Churchill's recent pledge that a British declaration of war on Japan would follow almost immediately upon the outbreak of war between Japan and the United States, a British announcement is expected soon. Columbia's correspondent, Ford Wilkins, was put on the air in CBS's regular 2:30 news program on Sunday afternoon from Manila. He was cut off the air suddenly while he was talking about air raid shelters, possibly because of censorship. In communication with Columbia's radio station, KGMB in Honolulu, we heard here in New York that the Pearl Harbor base had been attacked and anti-aircraft fire was heard. A telephone message to the United Press from Fort Schaefer in Hawaii said that 50 planes attacked the island of Oahu. The planes were officially described so far as unidentified in these messages, although later reports that have come in from the press associations definitely identify at least two of these planes as carrying the emblem of the rising sun, the emblem of Japan. The Pearl Harbor attack reported by KGMB in Honolulu is said to have been carried out in other messages by 50 to 100 planes, and a half an hour ago it was said to be still continuing. The smoke of anti-aircraft guns rose over the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. Heavy smoke also drifted up from Hickam Field in the Pearl Harbor area, apparently from fires, and witnesses said fires broke out on Ford Island. The main targets in this action by the Japanese appeared to be Hickman Field, which is the Army field, and the great naval base at Pearl Harbor, and several planes were reported shot down. Also, we've had a report from Honolulu that policemen and firemen were ordered in a radio broadcast to go to Army and Navy posts immediately. Major George Fielding Elliott, when this dispatch originally came in, pointed out that this may indicate that some of the Japanese resident in that area are being aids in this action by the Japanese against the shore areas. And the firemen and policemen may have been called up to stop any abortive revolutionary action in that area. Here's the first Associated Press dispatch from Honolulu. At least 2 Japanese bombers, their wings bearing the insignia of the rising sun, appeared over Honolulu at about 7:35 a.m. Honolulu time today and dropped bombs. As I told you a little earlier, these are the 2 planes of the reported 50 to 100 which have been definitely identified as wearing the insignia of the rising sun. Unverified reports said that a foreign warship appeared off Pearl Harbor and has begun firing at the defenses of that mighty fortified post. Reports also say that the Japanese bombers scored 2 hits, one at Hickman Field Air Corps Post on Oahu Island, and the other at Pearl Harbor, which set an oil tank afire. American anti-aircraft has set up a terrific din, and the sky also is filled with American battle aircraft. We have just heard that the Press Association dispatches, of course, are pouring in here. We've had a Washington Bulletin received just a few minutes ago that disclosed an American Army transport, which was carrying lumber, was torpedoed 1,300 miles west of San Francisco. And we've just heard by telephone that Albert Warner in Washington has news of a State Department announcement. For that report from Albert Warner, we take you now to Washington.
A statement has just been issued now by the State Department from Secretary of State Cordell Hull. It runs as follows. On November 26th, the Secretary of State handed to the Japanese representatives a document which stated the principles which govern the policies of the government of the United States toward the situation in the Far East, and setting forth principles for a comprehensive, peaceful settlement. At 1 p.m. today, this State Department statement continues, the Japanese ambassador asked for an appointment for the Japanese representatives to see the Secretary of State. The appointment was made for 1:45 p.m. The Japanese representatives arrived at 2:05 p.m. They were received by the Secretary of State at 2:20. The Japanese ambassador handed to the Secretary of State what was understood to be a reply to the American document of November 26th. Secretary of State Hull carefully read the statement presented by the Japanese representatives and immediately turned to the Japanese ambassador and with the greatest indignation said, "I must say in all my conversations with you, the Japanese ambassador," and this is Secretary Hull speaking, "I must say in all my conversations with you during the last 9 months, I have never uttered one word of untruth." And then Mr. Hull, referring to the Japanese note just handed to him, continued, "In all my 50 years of public service, I have never seen a document that was so crowded with infamous distortions and falsehoods on a scale so huge that I never imagined any government on this planet was capable of uttering them." The contents of the Japanese note is not given. Apparently it follows the example set by Hitler in the case of his own aggressions, in which he charges the victim of aggression with all sorts of faults. And now we have word that Secretary of War Stimson has just issued an order to all military personnel in Washington and throughout the country to report for work Monday in uniform. Then from the White House comes word that the Army has received news of signals of distress believed to come from an Army cargo boat 700 miles west of San Francisco. Presumably, this is another ship. Previously, we had word from the White House that an Army transport carrying lumber was torpedoed 1,300 miles west of San Francisco. Now here are some of the first comments that we have gathered from congressmen. Veteran Senator Glass of Virginia says, "I suppose that this means war." And ironically, he added, "Of course we're not going to surrender immediately without any effort to repel the attack." Senator Charles McNary, the Republican leader of the Senate, said, "I am amazed at Japan. I thought they had better judgment. I deeply regret the turn of events. Now the nation must unite in giving her a beating for her stupidity and aggression." That was from Senator McNary. Senator Hill, the Democratic whip of the Senate, says this: "The United States ought to use every means, every power to lick the Japanese, to lick them thoroughly and completely, and to do the job in the quickest possible time." Except for the bare announcements from the White House, there has been no further word. It's quite obvious that the American Navy and Air Force are taking counteraction against the Japanese. Once attacked, you do not stand on ceremony. The President has ample authority to send the Army and Navy into action when this country is attacked. Presumably a naval blockade of Japan has already been ordered, and other hostilities than the Japanese air attacks will be reported. In a case of this kind, with open hostilities and the United States clearly the target of offensive action, it can be expected that the President will go before Congress. There he will explain what has taken place, and unless unofficial speculation is wrong, he will ask Congress for a declaration of war. There is no doubt what Congress would do. It has been notable all along that congressional sentiment is much more united on the subject of Japan than it has been on European developments. But more than this, the United States itself is now the subject of definite attack. Let alone past sentiment, this would be enough to bring a united opinion in Congress. We return you now to New York.
That was Albert Warner's report from Washington on the latest developments in the Far Eastern situation with a report from the State Department. One mystery in connection with the announcements from Washington arose this afternoon when Ford Wilkins, the CBS correspondent in Manila, reported by telephone to Columbia at 3:30 o'clock that there had been no bombing of Manila. However, the INS has reported that the American naval base at Cafidi Island off Luzon was subjected to an enemy attack this morning. Army and Navy authorities commanded all forces to their stations and told them to resist the attack. There were no immediate reports on the damage. Now, Major George Fielding Elliott is here beside me again, and Major Elliott, we have a question which I believe needs answering. Do you see any grand strategy in these Japanese attacks upon the Hawaiian Islands and upon the Philippines?
The Philippines, and that refers particularly to the naval and air base at Manila, stands between Japan's home bases and the operations which she is conducting in Indochina. Therefore, the Japanese would like, of course, to eliminate this base if they possibly could. And it seems to me quite possible that the attacks on Hawaii are intended to cover a Japanese attack on the island of Luzon, and particularly directed at the naval and air base at Manila, in order to clear their lines of communication into the South China Sea, delay the arrival of the American fleet there. One interesting point is the fact that two apparently separate attacks by Japanese submarines upon American vessels between San Francisco and Honolulu have been reported. The Japanese have approximately 25 long-range submarines of the so-called I-50 class, which are capable of crossing the Pacific and returning without refueling. Apparently, therefore, these submarines, which would take about 10 to 12 days to get on that station from the nearest Japanese naval base, have been on their way for that length of time. And this throws a very curious light upon the Japanese request of a week ago for 2 additional weeks of negotiation. All this planning, all these attacks have been prepared over a long period of time. Certainly at least 2 weeks has elapsed since the original Japanese decisions were taken because of the location of the ships and comparatively slow ships such as submarines on this line of communications. One more item which may be of interest. We have just been informed here officially that the present reaction of the British government is officially this: to call attention to the Prime Minister's statement in his speech in the House of Commons some time ago that Great Britain would be at war with Japan 1 hour after Japan attacked the United States.
And now you've heard Mr. Warner's report of the War Department order in Washington ordering all military personnel in this country into uniform. The Army's order affected not only the thousands of officers on duty in Washington who have thus far performed their functions in civilian clothes to avoid a militaristic appearance, but all officers in every corps area, the United States possessions and outlying bases. And here is a bulletin that has just come in from the Press Association's dateline Los Angeles. Rear Admiral Charles H. Blakely broadcast an order today for all officers and men attached to the 11th Naval District to report to their ships or stations immediately. Washington is expected to blossom out tomorrow as a city of uniforms because huge numbers of officers have been pouring into the city for months to perform the Army's overhead functions. Early said that so far as the President's information went, attacks were still in progress at Manila and in Hawaii. That is, of course, Stephen Early, Presidential Press Secretary. In other words, he said, we don't know that the Japanese have bombed and left. He went on to say, as soon as the information of the attacks on Manila and Hawaii was received by the War and Navy departments, It was flashed immediately to the President at the White House. Thereupon, and immediately, the President directed the Army and the Navy to execute all previously prepared orders looking to the defense of the United States. The President is now with the Secretaries of Navy and War, and steps are being taken to advise the congressional leaders. Also, we received a report earlier from Washington that any news of the Far Eastern developments would have to come from the White House. Navy officials, when queried for news, made that statement. Congressional leaders immediately were advised of the crisis, too. Attachés of the Japanese embassy began burning secret documents in the embassy yard. The group of newspaper reporters and photographers stood by, watching, and after a few minutes, they were ordered to leave. The embassy doors were closed. There was no disorder. Columbia, of course, will interrupt any of its regularly scheduled programs to bring you bulletins and important developments on the news from the Far East as it develops in Washington, and as we receive reports from our correspondents, the press associations, and affiliated stations from the danger zone. W.L. Shira will be on the air at 5:45 over most of these stations. John Daly speaking.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
WCCO, Minneapolis. The United Press announces that it is ordering into operation on a 24-hour schedule all of its leased wire circuits throughout the country. The order was given to the American Telephone and Telegraph Company shortly after 2 p.m. to see that all newspaper and radio clients of the United Press, regardless of their normal hours of service, were hooked into the UP wire system immediately for continuing service until further notice. Now we take you back to the symphony concert by the New York Philharmonic Symphony Society.
At this time each Sunday, the National Broadcasting Company presents H V Kaltenborn, Dean of Radio Commentators, who today will analyze and interpret the day's startling news from the Pacific. Mr. Kaltenborn.
Good afternoon, everybody. Japan has made war upon the United States without declaring it. Airplanes, presumably from aircraft carriers, have attacked the great Pearl Harbor Naval Base on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands and have attacked Manila, capital of the Philippines. There has been damage. Some fires were started. About 50 planes participated in the attack on the Hawaiian Islands. Many, according to a bulletin that has just come in, were shot down. This attack occurred at the very moment when Ambassador Nomura and Special Envoy Caruso were at the State Department discussing the possibility of peace between Japan and the United States. We know that Japan set a precedent for this kind of attack in the Russo-Japanese War, when she attacked the Russian fleet without a declaration of war, while that fleet was not expecting attack. However, the United States was not unprepared for attack. Anti-aircraft guns immediately went into action and were responsible for bringing down many of the Japanese planes. We have no details from what happened in Manila, but they may come along before this broadcast is finished. Let me now tell you exactly what happened in the order in which it developed here in the NBC newsroom. At 2:25 came the first flash. White House announces Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. 10 minutes later came this announcement from the White House that Japanese airplanes attacked Pearl Harbor and all naval and military activities on the island of Oahu. That is the principal island of the Hawaiian group. It is the one upon which American military and naval establishments are located. It is a great fortified center of American military and naval strength in the center of the Pacific. White House Secretary Early received the information from the President, who presumably received it directly from the Navy. And his announcement said, the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor from the air and all naval and military activities on the island of Oahu, the principal American base in the Hawaiian Islands. That announcement was made to all press associations by telephone, and immediately after making it, Mr. Early hurried to the White House for conference with the President. The Navy refused to issue any statement on its own account and said that all information would be channeled through the White House. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor came news only 2 minutes later of the Japanese attack on Manila. The White House announced that the Japanese attack on Army and Navy bases at Manila was reported to the President.
Then began the dispatches from private sources, from the Press Association representatives themselves. The United Press reported that Oahu Island was attacked by unidentified airplanes. It is natural that the press correspondent does not know just what particular nationality planes belong to, but the Navy knows Japanese planes when it sees them. Policemen and firemen were immediately ordered in a radio broadcast to go to the Army and Navy posts to which they were assigned in the city of Honolulu. The smoke of anti-aircraft guns rose over the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard immediately when the attack began. And heavy smoke also drifted up from Hickam Airfield in the Pearl Harbor area. This apparently from the fires set by incendiary bombs. Other witnesses said that fires broke out on Ford Island. Ford Island is an important military island located in the center of Pearl Harbor, and many military establishments are located on that island. The dispatch from Fort Shafter in Hawaiian Islands, which came by telephone from Honolulu, states that 50 unidentified airplanes attacked the island of Oahu. The main targets appeared to be Hickam Field and, of course, the great naval base at Pearl Harbor. So far as is known, the attacks on Hawaii and Manila were made wholly without warning. This is the first sentence of a statement that has just come from the State Department in Washington. The statement reads, so far as is known, the attacks on Hawaii and Manila were made wholly without warning when both nations were at peace. And they were delivered within an hour or so of the time that Japanese Ambassador Nomura and Japan's Special Envoy, Mr. Caruso, had gone to the State Department and handed to the Secretary of State Japan's reply to the Secretary's memorandum of November 26. You may remember that yesterday we received the reply from Japan to the President's comment and request for information with regard to troop movements in Indochina. This afternoon, Mr. Caruso and Mr. Nomura bring to the Secretary of State the reply to Mr. Hull's general memorandum in which he called for a return to the basic principles of international law. The State Department goes on in its special statement just issued. Quote, as soon as the information of the attack was received by the War and Navy Departments, it was flashed immediately to the President at the White House. The President directed the Army and Navy to execute the previously prepared orders looking to the defense of the United States. And you may rest assured that both our Army, and particularly our Navy and our Air Force, were not caught by surprise by this attack. They knew what they might have to expect, and they were ready for anything that might happen. They have been ready for a long time, and their readiness has been developed increasingly in recent weeks and days. Let me go back to the telephone message that came from Fort Shafter, Hawaii. 50 unidentified airplanes attacked the island of Oahu today. There's a first point. It indicates that it was a relatively small aircraft carrier that brought these planes. However, it's possible, of course, that these first 50 will return and that then others will take off and continue the attack. However, since the element of surprise is now over, it seems less likely that this particular aircraft carrier will linger very long in the vicinity where the great mass of the United States fleet is located. We'll get news of naval action before long. The main targets, this dispatch again declares, were Hickman Field, the great airfield, and the great naval base at Pearl Harbor. Obviously, bombing the airfield is intended to prevent the taking off of planes which would seek out the aircraft carrier or of fighting craft which would attack the attacking bombing planes. Here is information received by NBC from Honolulu. It says that the air attacks on Hawaii were staged by unidentified planes flying at an altitude of about 20,000 feet. Bombs fell near the building housing the Honolulu Advertiser. So far, there are no reports of damage. The defenses on the island immediately went into action. Anti-aircraft guns sent showers of shells into the air. Obviously, if the Japanese know what they're about, they will not waste their bombs on the city of Honolulu. They will concentrate them on the important military objectives at adjoining Pearl Harbor. Here is something from the White House. The President immediately called in the Secretaries of the War and the Navy and is now trying to contact his congressional leaders. That's the end of the statement that has just come from Washington. The latest information that they have in the capital is that the attacks are still in progress. That would be natural enough, since obviously this is the beginning and not the end of an important military action. We've just had word from Washington that an Army transport carrying lumber has been torpedoed 1,300 miles west of San Francisco. This is further evidence of a carefully, long-planned attack against the United States. This is evidence that Japanese warships, Japanese aircraft carriers, Japanese planes, Japanese submarines have for some time been en route to their stations for the attack on the United States, which is now underway. London was naturally electrified by the news of the air attack on Hawaii and on Manila. Official quarters in London had been alert for some signs of the first outbreak in the Far Eastern warfare, but they had not expected it to come from that area, which simply means that most of us had had our attention diverted by the movement of Japanese ships in the direction of Singapore. Yesterday, you remember that the President had word that a large Japanese convoy was entering the Gulf of Siam. We have had word that large numbers of Japanese troops have been gathered in Indochina. And it is evident now that this was something of a blind, something to make us think that no nearer attack was impending. And obviously, it was all part of long-planned Japanese strategy to get all the advantage that comes when you get the jump on your potential enemy, when you are in action before he has had a chance to get into action, when you strike first. And that is exactly what Japan has done. There are unverified reports from Pearl Harbor that a foreign warship has appeared off Pearl Harbor and has begun firing at the defenses in that highly fortified post. The sound of cannon firing comes to Honolulu, to the UP correspondent, I believe it is, who is telephoning this story to the San Francisco Associated Press office. So it is the AP correspondent who tells us that there are unverified reports of a foreign warship appearing off Pearl Harbor. However, remember that the basis for that is cannon fire. And obviously, with bombs exploding in Pearl Harbor, with anti-aircraft cannon roaring in action, it is quite possible that it is these noises and not the attack of a warship on Pearl Harbor that was responsible. It seems unlikely that the Japanese, with such few fleet units as they could spare for an attack on Pearl Harbor, would risk those units in a direct attack on the great defenses of that naval base. Presidential Secretary Early declares this afternoon that so far as is known now, the attacks were made wholly without warning, at a time when both nations were at peace, and were delivered within an hour of the time that the Japanese ambassador went to the State Department to hand in the reply to the Secretary's memorandum of the 26th. Secretary of State Cordell Hull, today, according to a bulletin just in from Washington, angrily told the Japanese peace or war envoys that their government's answer to his recent document on the United States position in the Far East was crowded with infamous falsehoods and distortions. That frank speech from the Secretary of the United States to the envoys of Japan. It indicates the end of peaceful relations. It means that those envoys will be sent packing home. And the United States, through no fault of its own, without anything for which it is responsible, at the very moment when it was finally making a last effort to maintain peace, the United States has been attacked, and the United States will know how to answer that attack. Good afternoon.
You have been listening to Mr. H V Kaltenborn, noted news analyst. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Listen, America. Come closer. You and your home. And you speeding along the highways or riding the trains and skyways. Listen wherever you are. We bring you good news. Listen, America, we bring you good news. This afternoon, the National Broadcasting Company and the Women's National Emergency Committee, in cooperation with the Federal Office of Defense, Health, and Welfare Services, invite you to listen to the dramatic living newspaper of a nation on the march toward greater achievement, greater security through the health and strength of its people. Afternoon, Listen America presents as its guest one of radio's favorite daytime programs, Big Sister. The distinguished scientist at the United States Public Health Service, Dr. Floyd S. Goff, the motion picture star, Warren Williams, and the popular singer, Miss Irene Beasley. Our orchestra is conducted by Merle Kendrick. And now, here is our master of ceremonies, the distinguished editor, writer, and news commentator, John B. Kennedy. Good afternoon, all. Once again, we turn our spotlight on this America of ours. We silhouette the human living, the dynamic stories of a vital young America, forging toward a brilliant tomorrow. A picture of America building the health, strength, and security of its future on a solid foundation of real achievement today. This is America triumphant. This is good news. Good news from the farmers of America. Food for Americans, food for the British, food in reserve for the hungry of Europe. That's the triple challenge that faces American farmers as they wind up the 1941 crop year and begin to plan for 1942. Not so long ago, Paul H. Appleby, Under Secretary of Agriculture, returned from England with facts and figures on the food situation. In a recent speech in Kansas City, he said, "Every boatload of food we send to England produces the time that will elapse before the democracies of the world triumph over Hitlerism. I brought back facts and figures. We must translate them into freight and cargo." And to bring those facts and figures to the farmers of America, Secretary of Agriculture Wilkins himself traveled thousands of miles, spoke at scores of farm meetings. In Memphis, he told the southern farmers what was wanted.
We want 8% more dairy products next year than we had last year, and 5% more than we're going to produce this year.
And in Gloucester, Massachusetts,
I think almost every farmer by now must know the story of the 1942 production goals for his nation, his state, his county, and his own farm.
Yes, the farmer knows. Listen, America, to the farmers. Here, Cal. Lend a hand with this sledge.
All right, Jed.
So, the county commissioner said to me, "Jed," he said, "you've got to grow more vegetables, get more milk out of your cows." Yes. I said, fine, that's great. I don't know about the other fellows, but as for me, well, here, hold this post. Okay, Jed. Yep. I said, "I'll grow your food. Plenty of food." And so the farmers of America answer the call of freedom, producing in greater and greater quantities those
those foods vital to our health, strength, and security. The right food will keep us strong, and our strength will keep us free. And next, good news from the field of science. Here's exciting news from the headquarters of nutrition science. The laboratories where the search goes on night and day for new knowledge of what we need for health and strength. Today we bring you exciting news of a discovery about one of the new vitamins, pantothenic acid. And our guest scientist, who is going to tell you all about it, is the distinguished biochemist of the National Institute of Health of the United States Public Health Service, Dr. Boyd E. Duff.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I noticed you kept using the word new in speaking of pantothenic acid. It's so new, in fact, that we haven't had much time to get acquainted with it, even in the laboratory.
Well, I see, but only last week Dr. Roger Williams received the Chandler Medal of Columbia University for his work in identifying pantothenic acid, this new member of the B family of vitamins.
Yes, that discovery was announced only last year.
And I noticed that pantothenic is called the acid of life, necessary to all living creatures. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Kennedy, it seems almost certain that pantothenic acid is not only necessary for life, but for the health of man. I have to put it this way because we've experimented with pantothenic acid in animals, but not in man.
Well, what happens in the case of the animals, Dr. Dyer, when they are deprived of pantothenic?
Nothing good, I assure you, Mr. Kennedy. Without this vitamin, young rats fail to grow. There often doesn't seem to be anything drastic the matter with them, but they die suddenly. When we make an autopsy, we find that there are hemorrhages in the adrenal glands, and that many of the cells there have been destroyed.
Well, I suppose the adrenal glands are responsible for the adrenaline that our bodies require.
Exactly. The adrenal glands form, store, and secrete several substances which are vitally necessary to the health of the body.
Well, can you give us an example, Doctor?
Adrenaline, for one. When we are frightened or angry, we need a quick access of energy for quick action, and adrenaline helps to make this energy available. Another vital substance secreted by the adrenals is cortisol, which has to do with regulating the salt balance of the body. When this balance is disturbed and the potassium level in the blood gets too high, that is dangerous.
Well, in your experimental animals, Dr. Dobb, can you cure the condition originally brought about by starving them of pantothenic acid?
Yes, if we add pantothenic acid to their diet, provided our patients are not too far gone, the cells of the adrenal gland will then regenerate. And not only that, rats which get their pantothenic acid do not develop the disease condition of the adrenals.
Well, can we say then, Dr. Dobb, the pantothenic acid is a protective factor of...
We interrupt this program to take you to the NBC newsroom.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, Honolulu. A naval engagement is in progress off Honolulu with at least one black enemy aircraft carrier in action against Pearl Harbor defenses. This bulletin from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Back to our programs now. On the problem. But science, Mr. Kennedy, is not a question of what we hope, but of what we know. Fortunately, we can be sure that research as a whole will move forward steadily on the new ground of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dobb, for your contribution to the dramatic news of America on the march. From the halls of science, our living newspaper quickly switches the scene to the American home. And for a glimpse of everyday people putting the lessons of science into practice, we visit one of radio's best-known families, Big Sisters. Used to be much more of a problem to Big Sister than he is these days. But that was when Nettie was a kid. Now, Nettie's 16 and a man. Well, very close to being a man anyway. Nettie seemed to have something on his mind as he walked home this evening. Now he's just entering the house.
Is that you, Hart?
No, it's me, sis.
Oh, hello, Nettie.
Oh, Dr. Baxter.
Hello there.
Why do you look so grim, Nettie?
Nothing. Hey, excuse me a minute, sis. I want to make a telephone. If there's anything I hate, it's a liar.
What? Who's the liar, Nettie?
Pete Lynch, that's who.
What about it?
I'll tell you in a minute. Hello, Charlie. This is Nettie. Listen, I've got to ask you something. Were you near Dingman's Pond this afternoon? You didn't go near the place, huh? Well, what do you know? I just met Pete Lynch. He told me a kid was walking on the thin ice on Dingman's Pond this afternoon and fell in. And he saved his life. He said you saw him do it. No, that's all I want to know. Yeah. So long, Charlie.
Nettie, Isn't Pete Lynch that boy with the bad leg who came here to see you last week?
That's right.
The one who starved for the boy?
That's right, and he's the doggonest liar you ever saw in your life. Why, he told me...
Yes, sir, we heard that. He told you saved someone's life.
Yeah, and it was a lie. Boy, tomorrow when we get to school, I'm going to prove to all the fellas what a liar he is. After that, he won't have a friend in the world.
Does he ever hurt people with his lies, Nettie?
Well, no, he doesn't hurt them. What good is it to him to lie? Or he get found out.
Nettie, I wish you wouldn't expose him before the other boys tomorrow.
Why not? Gee, sis, you're not sticking up for a liar, are you?
No. But I'm trying to get you to see that you ought to be sorry for him.
Sorry for him?
Mm-hmm.
Why, do you know what he told me last week?
Nettie, listen to me, dear. Pete Lynch is a boy who limps. He can't run the way the others can. Can't do the things the other boys do. He's been that way ever since he was an infant.
Well, what of it?
Let me finish, Nettie. 3 years ago, his father left home. And since then, his mother has had to support Pete and herself by sewing for other people. Pete's a sensitive boy who feels all these things keenly.
Sure, I know he's had a lot of tough breaks, but that doesn't mean that...
Don't you see why he tells these harmless lies, Nettie?
What do you mean exactly, Ruth?
I mean that Pete's been deprived of a lot of things that other boys have. And that hurts. The ability to play the way other boys of his age can. Having a nice home. Pete misses all those things. Older people know how to do without things they want very much. But boys of Pete's age haven't learned how. Pete's been cheated, Nettie. And all these lies he tells, they're just an attempt to create a life he's never had. Pete feels a sense of shame because his father left home. He shouldn't feel that way, of course, but he does. He feels slighted and unimportant. And that's why he tells these lies. To make himself important in his own eyes. To build up his self-esteem.
You know, I never thought of it that way. Well, Pete isn't really a bad guy.
Of course he isn't. He's just a very unhappy boy. Nettie, why don't you ask Pete to have a talk with Dr. Bannister sometime? I'm sure Dr. Bannister wouldn't mind.
Not at all. I'd be glad to. Nettie, have you ever heard of mental hygiene?
Mental hygiene? What's that?
Well, that's for people who are confused and troubled and unhappy. A great many of the large hospitals have mental hygiene clinics. And it's especially important that more people know about them these days. After all, a man who has a burden on his mind is just as much a handicap to, well, let's say our national defense program as a man with a broken leg.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
What Dr. Bennett means, Nettie, is that there are older people who have the same trouble Pete has. People who need friendly advice and in return need very useful and happy people. With just a little understanding. While I think of it, what do you say we invite Pete over for dinner tomorrow?
Gee, that'd be a swell idea, Sid.
Your big sister has a lot of swell ideas. Don't you think so, Nettie?
Thank you, members of the cast of Big Sister. Thanks too to your sponsors, the makers of Brimstone, for pointing up the importance of healthy thinking and the need for tolerance in our forward strides towards better health, better strength, better security. Here is good news from America's first line of defense. The Navy's first line of defense is the health of its manpower. Last month in Tacoma, Washington, Jeff Warner of that city received an official order from Washington.
That's what it says, Mary, right here. Read it yourself. They want me back. They can't blame them, no, either. Times like these, good men are tough to get.
But Pop.
But what?
You're not as young as you used to be.
Oh, shucks. Man's as young as he feels. I feel fine.
Pop, you're almost 80 years old.
Who says so? I'm just 77, my gosh. 77. Still got 3 years before I'm 80. Shucks, I can pipe 80 admirals over the side before then. Don't stand there with your mouth open like a ventilated rat. Pack my duffel. I'm doing San Diego Friday for a physical exam.
Warner?
Yes, sir?
I asked for Warner, Jesse Warner.
Well, that's who you asked for, Doc, and that's who you got.
You're Warner?
Yes, sir. Chief Bolton made Warner retired. I guess they want me back.
How old are you?
77.
Sit in the chair. I want to check your feet.
Chief, don't have to sit in the chair for that. Hey, Doc. Upper and lower. Don't figure you'll find any cavities in these teeth. I paid $95 for them, by gosh, and they're perfect.
Respiration 20. Blood pressure 130 over 85. Hemoglobin 90%. Pulse 80. Say off. Okay, that does it.
Does what, Doc? In or out?
Here's the report. Read it for yourself.
Fit for active duty at sea. Doc, you've said a mouthful.
Today, Bosun's mate Jesse Warner of Tacoma, Washington, is wearing his heart on his sleeve. For his heart is the Navy, and the Navy has given him back his stripes. Sailing the seas along with Bosun Jesse Warner are hundreds of thousands of other strong Americans. Healthy men, keen and vigorous, alert for the split-second emergency that strikes without warning. Aboard a submarine somewhere in the Atlantic. In the cool, black hours before dawn, Samuel F. Chiarelli, fireman first class, grips the handrail as he stands his watch. At exactly 11 minutes past 2, a tremendous wave crashes over the deck. Man overboard. Reverse the engine quickly. Aye, Captain. Now get lines and notes ready. I'm going over the side. Up with Captain. Let me quick. Aye, sir. That's all right. I'll have time to take your watch.
Oh, no, sir. I'll take it myself. That ducking just woke me up.
And at 2:30 a.m., less than an hour and a half after Samuel Chiarelli faced death in the wild Atlantic, the call came, "All watch, all's well." And in West New York, New Jersey, some weeks later, a mother penned a few grateful lines to Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox.
Thank God for the quick action and training of the commander or captain. To all mothers of America who have sons far away from home and in service, I would like to give assurances that their sons are well taken care of and that everything is done for them. I wish I could do more for my flag and country than by bonds and defense them. Gratefully, Mrs. Elizabeth Chiarelli.
Build its men, conscious of the fact that the strongest armor of the fleet is the health and strength of its men. Our spotlight today has swung across the face of America, picking out the big news, the good news of America on the march toward better health, better strength, and better security. But wait, before you begin to sit back complacently, here's another side of the picture. A black side, but a true one. Listen, America, to the shocking bad news that proves that we as a nation have only begun the fight, that we are still far, far short of our goal. Listen, America. From Thomas Farron, Surgeon General, U.S. Public Health Service.
More than 40% of the people of the United States are undernourished or malnourished.
Underscoring this statement is the statement of Joseph Hirsch, Specialist in Health Education of the United States Office of Education.
Despite the fact that the cure for scurvy has been known for hundreds of years, a recent outbreak was reported in one state.
From the NBC newsroom. From
From Washington, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson today ordered the entire Army into uniform, effective tomorrow. His order applied to every one of the Army's 1,600,000, including the thousands of officers and men on duty in administrative posts in the War Department building who heretofore have been permitted to wear civilian clothes. And Norfolk, Virginia, Colonel to the War Department building who heretofore have been permitted to wear civilian clothes. Japanese nationals in this strategic naval center of Norfolk today, as soon as he learned of the Japanese attack on the Japanese air attacks in the Pacific, requesting all officers and men attached to the district, or vessels of the district, to report to their stations or ships.
When you go to buy one for a family,
California. Rear Admiral Charles A. Blakely of the 11th Naval District today issued orders shortly after announcement of the Japanese air attacks in the Pacific, requesting all officers and men attached to the district, or vessels of the district, to report to their stations or ships immediately. The district embraces Southern California from San Luis Obispo south to the Mexican border and all of Arizona and New Mexico. For the latest news on the Pacific situation, keep tuned to this station. We return you now to our regularly scheduled program.
And here she is to sing it for us today.
Good health to you. For when you keep healthy, you're wise and you're wealthy and safe. Here's how we spell health today. H means health vegetables, leafy and green. E is for eggs or for meat that is lean. While A is a change now and then if you wish. Instead of the eggs or the meat, healthy. L is for liquid, for citrus fruit juices. A pint or more milk for the health it induces. While T today said, enriched it must be. And H is this daily health motto. You see, all and all boys sing in buoyant chorus sing. Till every ear has heard spell out this magic word true. And here's good health to you.
Thank you, Miss Beasley. Now stepping to our microphone is a tall, well-built, handsome gentleman. A man who's given us many hours of entertainment as we watched him track down crime and criminals in one of motion picture's best-loved characterizations. Today he brings us his clues to the solution of the problem of better health and better strength. And here he is, the lone wolf himself, alias Warren Williams.
Thank you. And I do wish, Mr. Kennedy, that my explained deductions would be as simple as my theories are in this case. Malnutrition is a killer, no doubt about that. It stalks its prey with all the cunning of a tiger and strikes without warning.
What weapons do you use to combat this killer, Mr. Williams?
I try to use plain common sense. Hollywood is a favorite playground of bad health. Not the city, mind you, glory, no, but the people, the motion picture people in particular. They're constantly in a whirlwind, constantly working under pressure. Common sense calls for an antidote to this kind of pressure, a chance to restock the reservoir of energy. Well, the best way, of course, is by right eating, getting the proper food.
How right you are.
And this is important, too. I know because in my case it's been extremely effective. Along with good food, the body needs a chance to catch up with itself, wind up the spring, so to speak. In other words, recreation. For instance, I like to use my hands. I like to build anything. Anything? And on my little ranch in the San Fernando Valley outside of Hollywood.
From the NBC newsroom in New York.
London, Prime Minister Churchill and John G. Winant, United States Ambassador to Britain, are conferring tonight. They met a short time after President Roosevelt's announcement that Japanese planes had attacked Hawaii and the Philippines. The British government previously had served notice that it would declare war on Japan within an hour of any such declaration by the United States. But there has been no declaration of war as yet. The Secretary of War has just announced that all military personnel on active duty is to appear Monday in uniform. For the latest news on the Pacific situation, keep tuned to this station.
Back to our regular program.
Well, that's fine. Fruit juices are one of our 7 basic foods, you know.
So I heard. That list was most interesting. I wish I could say that I have had them all on my diet, but honestly, 1 or 2, never mind which, have been a bit absent from my dinner plate. But rest assured, Mr. Kennedy, that deficiency will be taken care of in the future. You see, the lone wolf has taught plain Warren William a number of good lessons. One is this. Never attempt to corner a killer until you know his methods, his habits, his weaknesses. So I'm going to take advantage of all your clues, all of them, in my own personal search for better health. It's the biggest case I've ever handled.
Thank you, Warren William, for your very pertinent remarks and for an interesting sidelight on the whole problem of catalytics. And I think you'll all agree that the news on Listen America today has highlighted the spirit of determination and courage that has always been a part of the American tradition. And for the thousands of you listening today who join in this great national crusade, it's good news that doctors everywhere are in the vanguard. Listen America to a vitally important message from Washington sent just this week to 90,000 American physicians by Paul D. McNutt, Federal Security Agency Administrator and Director of Defense Health and Welfare Services. Quote, strong leadership in the campaign for improved nutrition must come from physicians. Your active support in your community is essential. Nutritious foods may well determine the effectiveness of the national defense. The people must understand. They look to you for guidance. This is John D. Kennedy, reminding you that the right foods mean a healthier, stronger, and more secure America. Those of you who would like to have a complete copy of the Golden Rules of Nutrition may obtain one by sending a self-addressed stamped envelope to Listen America, Radio City, New York. The National Broadcasting Company and the Women's National Emergency Committee invite you to be with us next Sunday at the same time for more good news of America on the March. Our noted guests will include the cast of the famous radio program Pepper Young's Family, the distinguished scientist Dr. Robert S. Goodhart, the popular radio singer B. Wayne, and the lovely screen star Joan Blondell. Listen America has been presented as a public service by NBC and the independent radio stations associated with the Red Network of no broadcasting company.
Ladies and gentlemen, National Vespers. Ladies and gentlemen, as the quartet sings its opening hymn, Softly Now the Light of Day Fades Upon My Sight Away, we bring you another Sunday program of National Vespers with Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick as the regular presiding minister. And it is his voice you will now hear as he gives the call to worship.
Behold, I stand at the door and knock, saith the Lord. If any man will hear my voice and will open the door, I will come in.
Exile. afternoon, Dr. Fosdick will speak about finding unfailing resources. And if you are interested in securing a copy of his address and will write to National Vespers in care of your local station, you will receive one as promptly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick.
In this series of personal talks, we face today the fact that the maintenance of our morale depends on the possession of adequate spiritual resources. 9 times out of 10, what breaks us down is an external strain plus a sense of internal inadequacy to meet it. Morale is a power question. Test the truth of this by asking ourselves now what we are worrying about. Well, we're worrying about the war, about economic conditions, about our work, about our personal relationships, and endless other strains and dangers. But press the matter more intimately home, and what each of us is really worrying about is himself and his own stamina. This radio audience is full of people who feel like trees in a high wind. Today the winds are terrific. And asked what we're anxious about, we naturally say these tempests. But what we're really anxious about is our own rootage. If we knew that we had roots deep set enough to stand the tempest, our morale would not be shaken. Paul, for example, in a Roman prison, wrote his letter to the Philippians. And even in that prison, he talks about joy, rejoice in the Lord always, and about peace. The peace of God shall guard your hearts and thoughts. And the source of this high morale is made evident at the letter's close, when Paul writes, as Dr. Moffat translates it, "In him who strengthens me, I am able for anything." So, able for anything. Roots dependable enough for any weather. Obviously, such morale is a power question. At this point, the deepest need in us meets the deepest fact in Christianity. And if today these two could be brought together, the result might change the course of many a life. Some of us are like cisterns. We're good as far as we go. We have our uses, but we cannot count on ourselves. The sources of our supply are superficial. Our reserves are limited. We cannot stand a prolonged drought. But some are like artesian wells with resources that run deep, not at the mercy of transient circumstance. As Jesus said, "The water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up." Now, if such an experience of unfailing interior supply is really...
We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
Here's the bulletin. Washington. The president decided today, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and Manila, to call an extraordinary meeting of the cabinet for 8:30 p.m. tonight, and to have congressional leaders of both parties join the conference at 9 p.m. And now we take you to Honolulu. One moment, please.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, NBC. Hello, NBC. This is KCU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We have witnessed this morning the distant view, the great battle off Pearl Harbor, and the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. One of the bombs dropped within 50 feet of KTU Tower. It is no joke, it is a real war. The public of Honolulu have been advised to keep been done, but it has been a very severe attack. The Navy and Army appear now to have the air and the sea under control.
Just a minute. May I interrupt for just a second, please? This is the telephone company, the chief operator.
Yes?
We tried to get through on an emergency call.
Well, we're talking to New York now. Please, 94, hello, NBC, is all ready. 1, 2.
One moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we're standing by for further word from Honolulu, and we expect to rejoin them in just a moment. However, here's a bulletin which has just come into the NBC newsroom in New York. Nomura, the Japanese ambassador, and Kurusu, the special Japanese envoy, were at the State Department at the time of the White House's announcement of the attacks on Hawaii. The two Japanese went to see Secretary of State Hall at 1:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and remained about 20 minutes. And now we take you to Washington.
Talking from the newsroom of the White House in Washington. We've just come back from Secretary Early's office with word that the President has called his cabinet for tonight at 8:30. Later he'll see the congressional leaders to discuss the unwarned bombing of Manila, of Honolulu, of the torpedoing of a cargo ship 1,300 miles from San Francisco, and stress signals from another ship only 600 miles from our own coast to the Japanese. This ship studied the distress signal and gave very clearly, as was interpreted here, the indication that the Japanese are busy with submarines within our own water. Immediately that the President heard the news flash to him, he gave the orders already prepared, as he put it, for the defense of the nation. And then he gave out a statement. He told us it was obviously a part of a prepared statement of which you will hear more, for he is going to address Congress. He will give them a message. It may be a message asking for a declaration of war. And he said that this attack on Manila and Honolulu happened without warning, when both nations were at peace. And within a short time, within an hour of the time the Japanese ambassador Nomura and the special emissary Kurusu had gone to the State Department and handed a document to the Secretary of State with the Japanese reply to the Secretary's note of the 26th. And when the Secretary of State looked into that note, his face flushed with anger. And he said that he had never spoken an untruth to the Japanese, but when he read that document, he had never seen a document so full of untruth. Such infamous falsehoods, he said, that he could not imagine that they would be spoken by any government or any nation. This reply came when the Japanese must have known what was happening. It is almost inconceivable, the surprise with which this attack has come. The men that are filling this room now, whose voices you probably hear behind me, have been called from every quarter of the city. They're the leading correspondents. And it came like a flash out of the blue. As I came down in the taxi cab, there was a broadcast which was being interrupted with this bulletin. The driver hardly believed what he said. I passed soldiers on the street. One of them said, "Yes, I know," laughed and went on. What I'm trying to explain is that we have hardly grasped the importance of the situation. We've hardly grasped what is actually coming. But tonight we're going to hear a good deal more. The President has called in his cabinet for 8:30. At 9 o'clock they're going to be joined by the leaders, the congressional leaders, the Speaker, Sam Rayburn, McCormick, Joe Martin on the Republican side, Bloom, Barkley, Hill,
and then McNary, and the others he has recently called in when he has been discussing international matters. And it was stressed by Secretary Early that this meeting is rather a consideration of our international relations than actual military affairs, because the heads of the military committees were not called in. The President is assembling all the facts that he can, and as quickly as possible, he is going to transmit them in a message, a message containing full information of the situation to Congress. And undoubtedly, that will be the consideration of whether or not a formal war will be declared. Already Senator George has said that while this happened, partly in expectation, nevertheless it was a surprise, and it means only one thing. He says it means an open declaration of war. And he added that it will put the United States on a war basis which may last for 2 or 3 years. Only yesterday, I sat with Emissary Kurusu in the Japanese embassy. He smiled, talked pleasantly, and explained that there was still hope, that the only trouble was that we mustn't discuss principles, we must discuss the actual happenings. He said that after a nation was at war for 4 years, that they must be treated with a certain sympathy and tact, that there would be no difficulty in arranging the situation between Japan and the United States if we laid aside for the moment the discussion of general principles which could be agreed upon later and discuss the realistic question. Earlier, the Japanese viewpoint expressed to me was this. The Japanese people are 90% against war, the Japanese spokesman said to me. But, he said, the Japanese people, the majority of them, all of them, are willing to fight over the Chinese question. And then he went on to explain that China was a peculiar situation and must be so regarded. Nevertheless, the attention, the effect of these conversations have been such as to lead us to believe that, at least for the present, Japan was not to take any overt step, nor was she to give an answer which would be impossible for the United States to accept. It was a status quo. Nevertheless, there was a feeling here that Japan was merely putting off the evil day. And therefore, while the thing came as a shock, as all wars do, nevertheless, there was a feeling that at least there would be a period, perhaps 30 to 90 days, while we realized just exactly the direction that the trends were taking. I recall very well that I was sitting in the Reichsrundfunk house in Berlin when I carried the news that Hitler had launched his legions into Poland. And I must say that exactly the same feeling existed there among the populace, at least, that it came as a distinct shock. It came as a terrific blow to the people as a whole. And just as there I looked out the window and saw the people going up and down the street who had not had the news, so today when I hurried over to this newsroom with the rest of these men that are now crowding it, I had the same feeling, because I knew the faces that I looked into, the tourists, the Sunday persons going for their walks, had no idea whatever what had actually happened, or what it means. What it is to mean, we can only know as developments are revealed, and the dispatches at present are all being released here through the White House. They're coming into the White House from the War and the Navy Department, carried immediately to the President's office, and whenever possible, Secretary Steve Early brings them down and reads them to us in this crowded room, or one of the secretaries comes out, or we're called into his office. They are attempting to keep us in touch with every development as it takes place, and we will try to do the same for you as soon as it comes. That's all for the moment, and thanks very much. Back in New York City, here's the bulletin. Honolulu, Japanese bombs killed at least 5 persons and injured many others, 3 seriously, in a surprise morning aerial attack today on Honolulu. The sky was filled with puffs of smoke from exploding shells fired by American Army and Navy anti-aircraft units. Whether surface vessels of the United States fleet were in action against the enemy could not be learned at once, but columns of water rising from the sea as shells hit the water indicated a naval action. Viewed from the hills back of Honolulu, where many city folk went to view the fight, columns of heavy black smoke went skyward from Pearl Harbor. And Washington. Senate leaders were preparing today for an emergency session tomorrow in anticipation of a message from President Roosevelt asking for a declaration of war against Japan. Berlin. A German spokesman declared tonight there could be no reaction from Germany to the announced Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor until all sides of the case were at hand. And San Francisco. The Army and Navy went on a war basis on the Pacific seaboard today. All leaves were canceled, all furloughs revoked, and every man was ordered to report to his station. The commandant of the 3 naval districts on the west coast appealed by every medium for every officer and man to report to his post. The commander of harbor defenses ordered all coast artillery officers and soldiers of the harbor defenses are ordered to report to their stations immediately. All leaves and furloughs are canceled by order of the commanding general. Again, Washington. The Federal Bureau of Investigation announced today that it is completely mobilized and ready to deal with Japanese espionage and sabotage. Ottawa. Prime Minister Mackenzie King left his Kingsmere home today for Ottawa immediately after he was informed of the Japanese attacks. In just a few minutes, we'll hear from NBC's Far Eastern experts, and one of whom is Upton Close. Another bulletin, the Secretary of War has just announced that all military personnel on active duty is to appear Monday in uniform. For the latest news on the Pacific situation, please keep tuned to this station.
Ladies and gentlemen, we regret the interruption in the service of National Vespers and the sermon of Dr. Harry Emerson Fawcett. We give you now music.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
We take you now to Washington.
We return you now to New York.
One moment, please. Go ahead, Washington. Higgs talking from the newsroom in the White House in Washington again. We've just received a copy of the message which the President delivered to the Emperor of Japan Saturday afternoon. And in that message, the President addresses himself to His Majesty, as he says at this moment, in the fervent hope that Your Majesty may, as I am doing, give thought to this definite emergency, to ways of dispelling the dark clouds, and that I am confident that both of us, for the sake of the peoples not only of our own great countries, but for the sake of humanity and neighboring territories, have a sacred duty to restore traditional amity and prevent further death and destruction of the world. And he points out the specific issue that the people of the Philippines, the hundreds of islands in the East Indies, of Malaya, and of Thailand, are asking themselves whether these forces of Japan are preparing or intending to make attack in one or more of these directions. Well, the Japanese government answered that with the bombs over Honolulu and Manila, answered it with a torpedo that sent an American ship to the bottom, answered it with the threatening blows at a cargo ship.
Gentlemen, every second Sunday afternoon at this time, the National Broadcasting Company takes pleasure in presenting in joint recital Sylvia Marlowe and Richard Dyer Bennett. Miss Marlowe plays the harpsichord. Mr. Dyer Bennett sings songs to his own lute accompaniment. As this afternoon's program opens, Sylvia Marlowe invites you to listen to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. Music in two forms which Bach began to use early in life and which remains his favorite form to the bitter end, namely the prelude and fugue. The particular prelude and fugue Miss Marlowe plays are in the key of C minor. Music of Bach has found an eloquent exponent in Sylvia Marlowe. Now Richard Dyer Bennett steps into the spotlight, his 12-string Swedish lute in his hand. Richard Dyer Bennett begins with an 18th century English ballad, by name, The Plowboy.
A flaxen-headed cowboy, as simple as may be, and next a merry plowboy, I whistle orderly. But now, a saucy footman, I strut his worsted face, and soon I'll be a butler, and wave my jolly face. When steward I'm promoted, I'll put the tradesman still. My master's coffers empty, my pockets for to fill. When lolling in my chariot, so great a man I'll be. So great a man, so great a man, so great a man I'll be. The little plowboy that whistled orderly. You'll forget the little plowboy that whistled orderly.
Richard Dyer Bennett's second contribution. We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
Here's the bulletin. Washington, the president decided today, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and Manila, to call an extraordinary meeting of the cabinet for 8:30 p.m. tonight, and to have congressional leaders of both parties join the conference at 9 p.m. And now we take you to Honolulu. One moment, please.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, NBC. Hello, NBC. This is KCU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We have witnessed this morning the distant view, the battle off Pearl Harbor, and the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. One of the bombs dropped within 50 feet of KCU Tower. It is no joke, it is the real war. The public of Honolulu have been advised to keep in their homes and await results from the Army and Navy. There has been fierce fighting going on in the air and on the sea. The heavy shooting seems to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a moment, no interruption. How much damage has been done, but it has been a very severe attack. The Navy and Army appear now to have the air and the sea under control. Just a minute, may I interrupt this just a second, please? This is the telephone company, the chief operator. Yes. We try to get John an emergency call.
One moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we're standing by for further word from Honolulu, and we expect to rejoin them in just a moment. However, here's a bulletin which has just come into the NBC newsroom in New York. Nomura, the Japanese ambassador, and Kurusu, the special Japanese envoy, were at the State Department at the time of the White House's announcement of the attacks on Hawaii. The two Japanese went to see Secretary of State Hull at 1:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and remained about 20 minutes. And now we take you to Washington.
From the newsroom of the White House in Washington. We've just come back from Secretary Early's office with word that the President has called his cabinet for tonight at 8:30. Later he'll see the congressional leaders to discuss the unwarned bombing of Manila, of Honolulu, of the torpedoing of a cargo ship 1,300 miles from San Francisco, and distress signals from another ship only 600 miles from our own coast, the Japanese. This ship and gave very clearly, with interpreted clear, the indication that the Japanese are busy with submarines within our own water. Immediately that the President heard the news flash to him, he gave the orders already prepared, as he put it, for the defense of the nation. And then he gave out a speech. He told us it was obviously a part of a prepared statement of which you will hear more, for he is going to address Congress. He will give them a message. It may be a message asking for the declaration of war. And he said that this attack on Manila and Honolulu happened without warning, when both nations were at peace. And within a short time, within an hour of the time the Japanese ambassador Nomura and the special emissary Kurusu had gone to the State Department and handed the document to the Secretary of State with the Japanese reply to the Secretary's note of the 26th. And when the Secretary of State looked into that note, his face flushed with anger. And he said that he had never spoken an untruth to the Japanese, but when he read that document, he had never seen a document so full of untruth, such infamous falsehood, he said, that he could not imagine that they would be spoken by any government or any nation. This reply came when the Japanese must have known what was happening. It is almost inconceivable the surprise with which this attack has come. The men that are filling this room now, whose voices you probably hear behind me, have been called from every quarter of the city. They're the leading correspondents. And it came like a flash out of the blue. As I came down in the taxi cab, there was a broadcast which was being interrupted with this bulletin. The driver hardly believed what he said. I passed soldiers on the street. One of them said, "Yes, I know," laughed and went on. What I'm trying to explain is that we have hardly grasped the importance of the situation. We've hardly grasped what is actually coming. But tonight we're going to hear a good deal more. The President has called in his cabinet for 8:30. At 9 o'clock they're going to be joined by the leaders, the congressional leaders, the Speaker, Sam Rayburn, McCormick, Joe Martin on the Republican side, Bloom, Barkley, Hill, and then McNary, and the others who he has recently called in when he has been discussing international matters. And it was stressed by Secretary Early that this meeting is rather a consideration of our international relations than actual military affairs, because the heads of the military committees were not called in. The President is assembling all the facts that he can, and as quickly as possible, he is going to transmit them in a message, a message containing full information of the situation to Congress. And undoubtedly, that will be the consideration of whether or not a formal war will be declared. Already Senator George has said that while this happened, partly in expectation, nevertheless it was a surprise, and it means only one thing. He says it means an open declaration of war. And he added that it will put the United States on a war basis which may last for 2 or 3 years. Only yesterday, I sat with emissary Kurusu in the Japanese embassy. He smiled, talked pleasantly, and explained that there was still hope, that the only trouble was that we mustn't discuss principles, we must discuss the actual happenings. He said that after a nation was at war for 4 years,
that they must be treated with a certain sympathy and tact, that there would be no difficulty in arranging the situation between Japan and the United States if we laid aside for the moment the discussion of general principles which could be agreed upon later and discussed the realistic question. Earlier, the Japanese viewpoint expressed to me was this. The Japanese people are 90% against war, the Japanese spokesman said to me. But, he said, the Japanese people, the majority of them, all of them, are willing to fight over the Chinese question. And then he went on to explain that China was a peculiar situation and must be so regarded. Nevertheless, the attention, the effect of these conversations have been such as to lead us to believe that, at least for the present, Japan was not to take any overt step, nor was she to give an answer which would be impossible for the United States to accept. It was a status quo. Nevertheless, there was a feeling here that Japan was merely putting off the evil day. And therefore, while the thing came as a shock, as all wars do, nevertheless, there was a feeling that at least there would be a period, perhaps 30 to 90 days, while we realized just exactly the direction that the trends were taking. I recall very well that I was sitting in the Reichsrundfunkhaus in Berlin when I carried the news that Hitler had launched his legions into Poland. And I must say that exactly the same feeling existed there among the populace, at least. It came as a distinct shock. It came as a terrific blow to the people as a whole. And just as there I looked out the window and saw the people going up and down the street who had not had the news, so today when I hurried over to this newsroom with the rest of these men that are now crowding it, I had the same feeling because I knew the faces that I looked into, the tourists, the Sunday persons going for their walks, had no idea whatever what had actually happened or what it means. What it is to mean, we can only know as developments are revealed, and the dispatches at present are all being released here through the White House. They're coming into the White House from the War and the Navy Department, carried immediately to the President's office, and whenever possible, Secretary Steve Early brings them down and reads them to us in this crowded room, or one of the secretaries comes out, or we're called into his office. They are attempting to keep us in touch with every development as it takes place, and we will try to do the same for you as soon as it comes. That's all for the moment, and thanks very much.
Back in New York City, here's the bulletin. Honolulu. Japanese bombs killed at least 5 persons and injured many others, 3 seriously, in a surprise morning aerial attack today on Honolulu. The sky was filled with puffs of smoke from exploding shells fired by American Army and Navy anti-aircraft units. Whether surface vessels of the United States fleet were in action against the enemy could not be learned at once, but columns of water rising from the sea as shells hit the water indicated a naval action. Viewed from the hills back of Honolulu, where many city folk went to view the fight, columns of heavy black smoke went skyward from Pearl Harbor. And Washington. Senate leaders were preparing today for an emergency session tomorrow in anticipation of a message from President Roosevelt asking for a declaration of war against Japan. Berlin. A German spokesman declared tonight there could be no reaction from Germany to the announced Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor until all sides of the case were at hand. And San Francisco. The Army and Navy went on a war basis on the Pacific seaboard today. All leaves were canceled, all furloughs revoked, and every man was ordered to report to his station. The commandant of the 3 naval districts on the West Coast appealed by every medium for every officer and man to report to his post. The commander of harbor defenses ordered all coast artillery officers and soldiers of the harbor defenses are ordered to report to their stations immediately. All leaves and furloughs are canceled by order of the commanding general. Again, Washington. The Federal Bureau of Investigation announced today that it is completely mobilized and ready to deal with Japanese espionage and sabotage. Ottawa. Prime Minister Mackenzie King left his Kingsmere home today for Ottawa immediately after he was informed of the Japanese attack. In just a few minutes, we'll hear from NBC's Far Eastern experts, and one of whom is Upton Close. Another bulletin, the Secretary of War has just announced that all military personnel on active duty is to appear Monday in uniform. For the latest news on the Pacific situation, please keep tuned to this station.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
to thank the makers of Hallmark greeting cards for their courtesy in relinquishing their broadcast period so that you might hear these latest news bulletins. We present a piano recital. We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
We take you now to Washington.
Return you now to New York.
One moment, please. Go ahead, Washington.
From the newsroom in the White House in Washington again. We've just received a copy of the message which the President delivered to the Emperor of Japan Saturday afternoon. And in that message, the President addresses himself to His Majesty, as he says at this moment, in the fervent hope that Your Majesty may, as I am doing, give thought to this definite emergency to ways of dispelling the dark clouds, and that I am confident that both of us, for the sake of the peoples not only of our own great countries, but for the sake of humanity and neighboring territories, have a sacred duty to restore traditional amity and prevent further death and destruction of the world. And he points out the specific issue that the people of the Philippines, the hundreds of islands in the East Indies, of Malaya, and of Thailand, are asking themselves whether these forces of Japan are preparing or intending to make attack in one or more of these directions. Well, the Japanese government answered that with the bombs over Honolulu and Manila, answered it with a torpedo that sent an American ship to the bottom, answered it with the threatening blows at a cargo ship within our own territorial waters off San Francisco. But the message is, I can give you a part of it. We have much time here. He begins by saying that almost a century ago, the President of the United States addressed the Emperor of Japan a message extending an offer of friendship of the peoples of the United States to the people of Japan. That offer was accepted, and in the long period of unbroken peace and friendship that followed, our respective nations, through the virtues of their peoples and the wisdom of their rulers, have prospered and substantially helped humanity. That's the way the President opens this message. Then he goes on to say that only in situations of extraordinary importance to our two countries need I address your Majesty messages on matters of state. I feel that I should now so address you because of the deep and far-reaching emergency which appears to be in the formation. Developments are occurring in the Pacific area which threaten to deprive each of our nations of all humanity and all humanity of the beneficial influence of the long peace between our two countries. Those developments contain tragic possibilities. The people of the United States, believing in peace and in the right of nations to live and let live, have eagerly watched the conversations between our two governments during these past months. We have hoped for a termination of the present conflict between Japan and China. We have hoped that a peace in the Pacific would be consummated in such a way that nationalities of many diverse peoples could exist side by side without fear of invasion, that unbelievable burdens of armaments could be lifted for them all, and that all peoples would resume commerce without discrimination against or in favor of any nation. I am certain that it will be clear to your Majesty, as it is to me, that in seeking these great objectives, both Japan and the United States should agree to eliminate any form of military threat. This second essential of attainment of the high objectives. More than a year ago, your Majesty's government concluded an agreement with the Vichy government by which 5,000 or 6,000 Japanese troops were permitted to enter into northern French Indochina for the protection of Japanese troops which were operating against China and further north. And this spring and summer, the Vichy government permitted further Japanese military forces to enter into southern Indochina for the common defense of French Indochina. I think I am correct in saying that no attack has been made upon Indochina, nor that any has been contemplated. During the past few months, it has become clear to the world that Japanese military, naval, and air forces have been sent to southern Indochina in such large numbers as to create a reasonable doubt on the part of other nations that this continuing concentration in Indochina is not defensive in character. And then he comes to the point that I mentioned before, stating that because these continuing concentrations in China have reached such proportions, and because they extend now to the southeast and southwest, the peoples of the Philippines and the Indies have begun to fear an attack. That was the last appeal, the last argument. And then he goes on to say, I'm sure that your Majesty will understand that the fear of all these peoples is a legitimate fear, inasmuch as it involves their peace and their national existence. I am sure that your Majesty will understand why the people of the United States, in such large numbers, look askance at the establishment of military, naval, and air bases, manned and equipped so greatly as to constitute armed forces capable of measures of defense. The rest of the message I read to you, you can see how it was the last appeal, the answer to the argument that this country had offered continually, stating that those troops could not be going there for mere defensive purposes. Now we know the truth. They were not. That's all for the moment from Washington, and thanks very much.
While Volkage was talking in Washington, a wire came in, a bulletin that the Supreme Command of the nation's defense forces are now in conference at the White House. Secretary of War Stimson, Secretary of Navy Knox, and General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, were with President Roosevelt. Admiral Harold R. Stark, the Chief of Naval Operations, remained at his desk in the Navy Department. A bulletin from Honolulu. Parachute troops were sighted off Harbor Point today. And now for Navy men in the New York area. Here's a notice that all Navy personnel in 3rd Naval District are requested to report to their ship or station as soon as possible. And now, for the benefit of our listeners who may have missed our first direct contact report from Hawaii a few minutes ago, here is the text of this broadcast over NBC. We have witnessed this morning the attack of Pearl Harbor and the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by Army planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. One of the bombers dropped within 50 feet of Tonti Tower. It's no joke. It's a real war. The public of Honolulu has been advised to keep in their homes and away from the Army and Navy. There has been severe fighting going on in the air and on the sea. Then there was an interruption followed by this. We have no statement as to how much damage has been done, but it has been a very severe attack. The Army and Navy, it appears, now has the air and sea under control. Keep tuned to the station for further details. This is the
We interrupt this program to bring you a special broadcast.
Here's the bulletin. Washington. The president decided today, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor and Manila, to call an extraordinary meeting of the cabinet for 8:30 p.m. tonight, and to have congressional leaders of both parties join the conference at 9 p.m. And now we take you to Honolulu.
One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4.
One moment, please.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, NBC. Hello, NBC. This is KPU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We have witnessed this morning a distant view, a brief battle off Pearl Harbor, and a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. One of the bombs dropped within 50 feet of KPU Tower. It is no joke, it is a real war. The public of Honolulu have been advised to keep in their homes and await results from the Army and Navy. There has been fierce fighting going on in the air and on the sea. The heavy shooting seems to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a moment, we'll interrupt you. We cannot estimate yet how much damage has been done, but it has been a very severe attack. The Navy and Army appear now to have the air and the sea under control. Just a minute. We want to interrupt this just a second, please. This is the telephone company, the chief operator. Yes? We try to get through on an emergency call. Could you tell me? Well, we're talking to New York now. Please, 34. Hello, NBC. Is all ready? 1, 2.
One moment, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we're standing by for further word from Honolulu, and we expect to rejoin them in just a moment. The National Broadcasting Company now takes you to London.
This is London. The sudden Japanese air attack on Hawaii came as a complete surprise to most people in Britain. The first intimation that the general public had of the move was made about an hour and a half ago on the regular BBC news program. Now it's the topic of all conversation and a great deal of speculation. One well-informed quarter said to me tonight, an attack on Burma or the Dutch East Indies wouldn't have surprised us at all. But the straight, bold-headed way the Japanese acted against Hawaii was completely unexpected. In view of Mr. Churchill's recent statement that Britain would follow America within the hour as she became embroiled with Japan, the general feeling here tonight is that the British government will lose no time in making its stand plain. No official statement has yet been issued, and official quarters are waiting eagerly for further information. Some well-informed quarters in London tonight explained that an official British declaration of war would probably have to wait for a clarification of the official American attitude, and noted that officially the United States can't declare war until Congress meets. But nobody here supposes there will be any hitch or delay in British action. The man in the street presumes that measures have already been coordinated between the British and American Navy chiefs for the defense of the Pacific. And although the Admiralty is keeping mum, most people believe that the British Navy has already decided what part it will play in this new action in the Pacific. We return you now to New York.
We take you now to San Francisco.
Francisco, we present NBC's expert on the Far East, up and close.
Hello, fellow Americans. The most fantastic thing that has yet happened in this fantastic world is the bombing of Honolulu and the bombing of Manila and the sinking of several ships off this coast. We don't know yet what's behind this. There's more behind it than meets the eye. So far, the reports that have been coming in have been entirely based on military sources and military understanding and military computation. I think I have just received the most interesting and perhaps the most important sidelight on what has happened. I remember very well the Manchurian incident of 1931, when the Japanese army, overnight, sprang upon the Chinese army and seized Manchuria. The next day, I was in touch with the Foreign Office in Tokyo. I discovered that it was a complete surprise to the Tokyo Foreign Office, and that government in Tokyo, if it had been properly pressured by America and England, would have repudiated that attack and declared it a mutiny. I have just been in touch with the San Francisco Japanese Consulate General. The consul, Mr. Yoshio Muto, was not able to talk, but his representative and secretary, Mr. Kaye Inagaki, spoke to me from the home of Mr. Muto. He said that the attack is a complete surprise to the consul general here in San Francisco, that the San Francisco Japanese Consulate General knew about it, was hearing it over our radio, and he implied that it is likewise a complete surprise to the Foreign Office in Tokyo and the Japanese government in Tokyo. Now, that may prove to be true. It is very possible that there is a double cross in this business. I suppose that if the attack on Honolulu had been made in such force as to destroy the American naval base there, we might believe that the Japanese government was behind it as a matter of policy. But you notice that the news gives us every assurance that it is far from destroyed, and that the only thing left there now as a result of the first attack are a few parachute troops wandering around on the sand somewhere on the north end of Oahu Island. They will soon be pulled in the bag, and we'll find out who sent them. It is possible, my friend, that this is a coup engineered by German influences and with the aid of German vessels in the Pacific. Again, it is possible that this is a coup engineered by a small portion of the Japanese Navy that has gone fanatic and decided to precipitate war. And still again, it is possible that this is a coup engineered by the group in Japan that wants war kicked out of office. And that when the thing is brought home to the Tokyo government now, it might be possible for the Tokyo government to repudiate the action, call upon the nation to repair the injury to America by agreeing to American terms and precipitating a complete revolution in the government in Tokyo. All of these things are possible. You will have to wait and see what happens. Now, I would be glad to go out and talk as long as they wish me to take the time on various phases of this situation. It seems to me that if the coup is precipitated by those fanatics who have wanted America at war with Japan, and vice versa, it might have been done as an answer to the answer of Secretary Cordell Hull to the envoys Caruso and Nomura. You notice we are told that Mr. Hull burst out in true Tennessee language and told the Japanese that their reply was crowded with infamous falsehoods and distortions. I have been in many a Japanese brawl, I am sorry to say, and I have seen many an argument with Japanese that would have ended just an argument, suddenly burst into violence because something was said by one of the so-called white people in the brawl that suddenly lashed across the Japanese face. Now, it is possible that the Japanese completely lost face and descended to the status of being willing to engage in a violent brawl as a result of this answer, although it might be that this answer and Secretary Hull's message came at the same time. But it sounds like one of those Japanese arguments that suddenly descends into violence. We cannot be sure yet that the Tokyo government is behind it. As to the president's address to the Mikado Saturday noon, which we just learned about through Mr. Balkins in Washington, certainly it was a very sweet and a very humble message. And it reminded Japan of the way in which America stood by Japan 100 years ago when Japan was coming out of medievalism and becoming a modern power.
And if America had not mothered Japan at that time, Japan would have been destroyed by the empire-building nations of Europe who were attacking Japan at that time. Today we are mothering China in the course of her changeover from medievalism to modernism. This message, if it reaches the Japanese people, will have a very interesting and valuable influence in Japan. Thank you for now.
From San Francisco, we have presented NBC's expert on the Far East up and close. The National Broadcasting Company takes you now to Honolulu.
Going on again. It seems as if we've got to try to make sense out of something that just doesn't make sense. And yet, if we look at it perhaps from the standpoint of old Oriental hands that have been working with this sort of thing for a long time, we can begin to see some things that might make sense. As I've said before, if the attack on Honolulu is not of sufficient force to really cripple that great naval base, but merely sufficient to anger the Americans and make them decide to destroy Japan, then it doesn't make sense from the standpoint of Japan, unless it's going to be used by some faction in Japan to try to kick the fanatic Army and Navy crowd out of power in Japan and reverse Japan's policy and bring her over to the Anglo-Saxon side and take her away from the German side. Now, of course, we might suspect that the Chinese would have engineered a policy like this to get war on between China and Japan if they had anything to engineer it with, but they haven't. That's out. As I've said before, it might be the Germans. We'll have to look for that angle. There have been German raiders in the Pacific the last few weeks. There have been several vessels sunk by German ships, apparently. It might be one of the factions in Japan itself. So far, all we can learn from Honolulu is that the actual bombing has stopped, although the air beam seems to be still out. But we've been on the telephone to Honolulu, and they say that the actual shooting seems to have stopped for now. We can't get any word about much damage except some explosions of great magnitude, some fuel tanks that have been blown up. There's one report that 2 ships were sunk in the harbor, and there's this report about parachute troops being to land and wandering about the beach somewhere. We'll learn a lot more when maybe some aviators are shot down who are still able to talk, or some parachute groups gathered in, and our men can ask some questions. We have as yet, here comes a bulletin. The War Department has invoked the Espionage Act against the publication of military information regarded as secret. We all know that, and we can't any longer state anything about Army strength outside the continental limits of the United States. As to the watch over the Japanese community, it's interesting that we learn that on the Atlantic coast in New York and in Norfolk, special police watch has been put over the Japanese. There are very few Japanese there to watch. Here on the Pacific coast, where there are more Japanese than anywhere else, and so far we have no word whatever of anything untoward having happened. I think we can take the word of the local San Francisco Consulate General that the Japanese community has been totally surprised by this action, and so far there is no indication here whatsoever that any sabotage has broken out or that any Japanese spies or saboteurs were warned in time to go into action. Of course, the people around Little Tokyo and Los Angeles are on the TVs. So far, I think they've conducted themselves very well, so far as we can learn by the dispatches. Said that the sheriff has sort of taken charge there at Little Tokyo and has gathered up a number of volunteers, and they have set up a volunteer watching post, and they're watching the Japanese, but they haven't had any reason to do anything. And people on both sides of the fence there are remaining calm and decent, which is certainly good news. We are waiting for confirmation about the reports of sinking of the ship in the Pacific. Now, as I say, that could be done by Germans, perhaps, as well as by Japanese. We shall have to see what happens. Of course, the general comment here on the street is that if the Japanese really did this on purpose, they are pretty foolish, and yet if they did it on purpose, they have certainly got guts. That's the way the American people on this coast are taking it. We'll wait and see what happens now, and particularly watch for a declaration from Mr. Nomura in Washington. Thank you. Oh, I'm to go on a little while longer. I'm sorry, I got the signals wrong. All right, there's plenty of material here in front of us. Police Department poured reserves into the district in Los Angeles, a little Tokyo. But as I have told you, there are no disorders reported from there yet. If this is a purposeful attack on the part of the Japanese, intended by the government, we're in for an exceedingly bitter war in the Pacific. A war in which all the bitterness of racial hostility will come out. Because the average American is dense to the very marrow, having been attacked this way, unawares, when his own government was talking in the friendliest fashion with the emissaries of the Tokyo government. But as I say, I wouldn't accept that too soon. It's very possible that this is something engineered over the head of the Tokyo government, and we'll be hearing from the Tokyo government before very long. It is to be noted that there has been no declaration of war from Tokyo or from our side. And, of course, we can't issue a declaration of war until Congress assembles. But still, there's been no statement as yet that a declaration will be asked for. A good deal of speculation is going on as to what we'll do with Mr. Caruso and Mr. Nomura. Well, of course, we want to hear from them first. And if Japan has used them as a blind to cover while she started shooting us, there'll be a lot of feeling that we ought to put them in jail. On the other hand, we have our ambassador and his helpers in Tokyo, and we have to get them out, and there'll have to be an exchange on a hostage basis. But I'm not at all sure that Mr. Nomura and Caruso were not as surprised as the local San Francisco Consul General by what has happened this morning. Thank you, and more later.
From San Francisco, we've brought you NBC's news analyst. Go ahead, Honolulu. The island of Oahu in the Pacific, one of the most thickly populated islands of the Hawaiian group, was attacked by Japanese planes this morning, starting at about 8 o'clock. No one would believe when reports emanated from the 2 radio stations here that the islands had been attacked. But when bombs began falling in various parts of the city and in different Army and Navy posts and bases, people knew Japan was endeavoring to eradicate America's outposts in the Pacific. Now, here's a report that I've gathered from different reporters of the Honolulu Advertiser who've been out endeavoring to get information concerning the Japanese air attack on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. The first information in Honolulu that planes of Japan were attacking the islands was about 8 o'clock this morning, Hawaiian time. The first group of Japanese airplanes attacked Fort Island at Pearl Harbor, the Navy's mighty fortress in the island. Roy Batusik, a local attorney, was up in his private plane flying over Koko Head when he said 1 or 2 Japanese planes gave him a salute of machine gun bullets as they approached the city. The plane was slightly damaged, and Mr. Batusik made a landing. After machine gunning Fort Island, the first Japanese planes moved to Hickam Field. Observers said considerable damage was done to planes and to Hickam Field. There is great activity there now in clearing the field of debris. At Pearl Harbor, where is based the Pacific Fleet, 3 ships were attacked. The Oklahoma was set afire. All lines of communication seem to be down between the various Army posts and Navy aerodromes and Army airfields. There has been no statement made by the Navy. The Army has issued orders for all people, the civilian population, to remain off the streets. The first raiders carried torpedoes and did their damage to shipping in Pearl Harbor and off Honolulu. Everyone here in the islands were taken by surprise by the attack, and even yet it's difficult for some people to believe that our air raid on these beautiful islands has actually happened and that lives have been lost. Several planes have been shot down, and anti-aircraft gunnery is very heavy. It is thought that the planes came from the south in the direction of the island of Kauai.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hickam Field, and Wheeler Field, several squadrons of Japanese planes came in from the south over Diamond Head, dropping bombs and incendiary bombs over the city. One bomb dropped in front of the governor's mansion at Washington Place and killed one man. Another dropped by the Honolulu Advertiser, nearly hitting several people and almost reaching its mark. At Pacific Heights and Dowsett Highlands, beautiful residential districts, there was heavy bombing. One woman was killed in Dowsett Highlands. The governor has proclaimed a state of emergency. Traffic is almost at a standstill in parts of the city. However, the traffic to and from Waikiki seems to be normal. When Japanese planes appeared over Waikiki, there were many people out in the streets and watched the bombing there. One man at Waikiki was badly injured when a bomb dropped in the heart of that beach resort. The Japanese planes seem to have come over the city and the environs, but no intimation whatsoever that these were Japanese planes. And it was a very difficult for people here to believe that these were Japanese planes. Here's a report that just came from Hickam Field. There were 350 men killed in a direct bomb hit on the barracks at Hickam Field. And at Bellows Field, on the other side of the island, on the windward side of the island, the field was bombed very heavily. That's all the news from Honolulu now. We'll be back with more news at a later time. This is KGU in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Returning it now to New York.
Back in New York City, we'd like to read now a telegram. It reads and addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt for White House, Washington, D.C. All our facilities and personnel are ready and at your instant service. We await your command. It's signed David Sarnoff, President, Radio Corporation of America, and Chairman of the Board, National Broadcasting Company. And here is a message for NBC Associated Stations. The National Broadcasting Company newsroom in the Orient, New York, Hollywood, San Francisco, and Washington will remain on a 24-hour basis throughout this emergency. If news warrants, NBC will broadcast throughout the night. And now for another special broadcast, we take you to Washington.
Tonight at the White House, President Roosevelt will meet with his cabinet members to determine what course the administration should follow after the Japanese attack on the United States. Beyond doubt, he will ask Congress to make some declaration. What that will be, we do not know. But here in our Washington studios are several congressional leaders who can give us a cross-section of the feeling in Congress. They have been sitting at the speaker listening to Upton Coates speaking in San Francisco and the commentator from Honolulu. They are the Senator from Utah, Senator Albert G. Thomas, Senator Walter F. George of Georgia, and Representative Luther H. Johnson of Texas. First voice that you will hear will be that of Senator Albert D. Thomas of Utah. Senator Thomas, just how would Congress go about declaring war on Japan if the President decides that a formal declaration should be made?
When it comes to Japan with a declaration or a statement about the condition, it would have to be that war has actually started. Because an attack upon Hawaii is an attack upon the incorporated part of the United States, and it's definitely an invasion. Our task would be, therefore, to repel an invasion. That means that the declaration of war would not be initiated by us, but a statement by Congress would be a result of the action already taken by Japan.
Well, Senator, do you think it would be a joint resolution?
It would be a resolution by the whole of Congress. Yes, on the recommendation of the President.
Senator Walter F. George of Georgia, we would like to pose this question to you. Is there any doubt that Congress would pass a declaration in view of Japan's attack?
Assuming that the attack is by the Japanese government and all of the evidence makes an attack by mere factions of the Army or Navy inconsistent with the facts so far reported. There would, in my opinion, be no doubt of a speedy recognition of a state of war, which, in legal effect, would amount to a straight declaration of war by the United States against Japan.
So, Senator, in view of the comments you've heard, the broadcast, and those that you have received in your office, no doubt, what is your opinion, your statement, if you would like to make one, of the situation that exists and what little we know about it?
It is unbelievable that Japan would have made an unprovoked attack, but all of the evidence is consistent with that fact. At the very moment when the State Department and the President were undertaking to continue a state of peace with Japan, the attack was made. The developments of the last 3 or 4 weeks particularly indicate that this movement by Japan has the authority of the Japanese government back of it. Assuming that to be true, although it's an unbelievable development in our international affairs, the United States will not hesitate to accept the state of war created by Japan and enter vigorously in its prosecution.
Representative Luther A. Johnson of Texas is in the group and the only representative of the House at the gathering here at our microphone. Senator, Representative Johnson, are these your views or do you have opinions on the situation?
I think that Senator Thomas and Senator George have very clearly and accurately stated the views of a nation as a whole. And I think that Congress would undoubtedly carry into effect their statements they've made with reference to the state of war. And I think that Japan's attitude and this beginning of this war is characteristic of Japan's method of waging war in recent years. The invasion of Manchuria and the invasion of these other countries have all been without warning. And in doing that, they not only follow their technique of war, but they also are consistent with the league to which they belong or which Adolf Hitler is their head. The American people, I will say, are united, and after the long, tolerant, patient efforts made by President Roosevelt to hold to a threat war, I think that if Japan now brings on this war, it will find the United States united and unified as never before.
Representative Johnson and Senators, may we interrupt our little discussion and roundtable. I'm going to return to the NBC newsroom in New York for just a moment.
In New York now, the NBC has a special message. The Secretary of War directs that all firms and manufacturing plants that have defense contracts or who are working on defense orders will at once institute proper measures against sabotage. Would you repeat that message again from the NBC, a special message? The Secretary of War directs that all firms and manufacturing plants that have defense contracts or who are working on defense orders will at once institute proper measures against sabotage. Another bulletin now for all Army men in the New York area. The 2nd Corps Army Area Headquarters here in New York has revoked all leaves and furloughs and ordered all men to report to their posts immediately. Again, New York. News of the Japanese attack on outlying U.S. possessions caused crowds to gather in Times Square today, and at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, the crowd was rapidly increasing. In newsreel theaters, programs were uninterrupted. Attaches in the Japanese consulate on 5th Avenue worked feverishly, filing records into suitcases and began carting them away. A smell of burning paper indicated that some records had been destroyed. Washington. President Roosevelt, in his message yesterday to Emperor Hirohito of Japan, vainly attempting to avert a Far Eastern conflict, assured the Nipponese government that the United States had no intention of invading Indochina and expressed the view that America could obtain pledges from the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, Thailand, and China, and that no such attack would be made if Japanese troops were withdrawn from that area. This news has come to you from the NBC newsroom in New York, and this is the National Broadcasting Company.